Good evening all and welcome. The Mortis Media app is finally out for people on Android, and for everyone else on Apple, it will be out very soon. This is what it looks like. You can select the type of story you want, select the story itself, adjust the parameters within the app, and finally play around with the background music and sound effects. Level them, layer them, play all the sound effects you want. Rain in this case, or any others that you want to throw in, you can do that. It's a lot of fun, and I would really appreciate it if you guys could download it, give me your honest feedback, and leave a review and a star rating. That's all I'm asking, and it would mean the absolute world to me. Tonight we're going to listen to how it would sound like on the app, with a selection of stories and, of course, some nice rain background to keep us busy. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Don't forget to download and leave that review, and let the darkness take control. I have played World of Warcraft since its release, and up until 2 years ago when my first daughter was born. I met my husband because of the game and had 2 babies. That game saved me from the cruel reality that I was forced to endure at the hands of my father. I was safe in this virtual world, away from his sick perversion and harsh words and actions. I loved to raid a lot, I mean religiously. And as a 16-year-old girl playing a game dominated by men, I got a lot of attention, 90% of it being negative. This is one of those, although I didn't think so at first. My guild and I were raiding, and our main tank was sick, so we were low for a body for Nax. We found a new tanker from a sister guild and began our raid night. I was a healer and was assigned to said new tank. He was super nice, very talkative, and we talked a lot that night, even long after the raid had ended. We even went so far as to exchange MySpace and email. His name in-game was Razor, so that's what I always called him. My name in-game was Chastity, so that's what he called me. We didn't use real names, and I'm so very glad that never happened. We spoke for ages, and I was thrilled to discover he lived not 25 minutes away. Now, seeing as how I was a 16-year-old girl, I posted way too much information on MySpace. Razor and I spoke for weeks and weeks, and he was so nice and even helped me through a tough breakup. We talked on the phone until the wee hours of the morning, and he listened to me cry and offered kind advice to a very lonely, stupid teenage girl. Keep in mind, he said he was 27 at the time. Looking back at this now, I realize how creepy it was becoming a lot earlier than I noticed it back then. He started flirting, and I must admit I flirted back too. But then he got sexual, and as a 16-year-old girl I lived for attention. Then his emails got slightly violent. One incident in particular I remember was an email he sent where he told me in graphic detail how much he would like to have me. And stupidly, even after reading that, I still spoke to him. It was extremely graphic. One day after walking my dog through the park, I returned home to the phone ringing off the hook. No one was home, which was normal as both my parents worked a lot. I answered it and it was him. The first thing he said was, "I saw you today. You're so cute." He described my dog, everything, what I was wearing and even my makeup. Why didn't you say hi? Oh, I didn't want to scare you. You know me, if you saw me, I have a lot of scars, mostly on my neck. Even back then in my stupidity, I started to get scared. Yeah, from what? From glass. All I remember him next saying was, "Can I come in?" I slammed the phone down, grabbed 2 of the biggest knives in the kitchen. I grabbed my dog, a 200-pound St. Bernard, and hauled her into my room. I barricaded my door and heard someone pounding the front door. The pounding continued for what seemed like hours until it got dark. I jumped at every single noise I heard until my mum got home. I never answered any more of his phone calls or emails after that, though he sent tons and emailed me several hundred times a day. I'm so glad I never opened that door. I attend a relatively small Christian college. This college has a very old, very large library, which I work at. I've been working at it going on about a year, so I've been here late at night and such. Now, despite being a Christian, I am rather skeptical in regards to spirits and ghosts, but I believe they are tricks of the mind. Now, I have a friend called Veronica, and she is very in tune with spiritual things, most likely from her history of being attacked by spirits when she would visit her Wiccan father. She works at the library too, and even during the times when the library is mostly completely empty, she believes there's some kind of entity on the 3rd floor, such that she actually does all in her power to avoid going up there alone. Now, I'd never thought anything about the 3rd floor, but not too long after our discussion I went up there alone very late at night. A lot of the aisles had lights off and it was very dark outside. As I turned around, I saw something slip back into one of the aisles, and I quickly noped out of there. Since then, I have found some interesting developments. I found out the college is extremely old and has been in existence for over 150 years. 120 or so spent at the current location. It also retains very old buildings, some being over a century old. I told everyone about the weird shadow creature on the 3rd floor of the library, but now I have more information. I recently discovered that the building, built in the early 1900s, was at first a church before being remodeled into a library. This goes towards the history of the building. Next, I had another encounter. I was once again tasked with shelving books on the 3rd floor and had to go down one of the side units. To describe it, imagine a big rectangle with 2 lines parallel and through the middle. Those lines are walkways, and to the far right are study areas and the windows, letting in light, and all the way to the left is bookshelves lit by lights. Now, the way the lighting works on those side tracks is they have a big strip of tubes down the middle of the rows, and you press a button which turns on the light and the timer. I've been told and have experienced that the timers for the lights stay on and should last an hour or so. That being said, I turn on the lights in the side stacks, head on it, and start shelving books. When not a minute later, the lights flicker off. I then hear rapid footsteps walking away. I, of course, am already uncomfortable on the 3rd floor, so I rush to see if it's a co-worker who knows it's me upstairs. Nope. I look 2 to 3 rows in the direction and see no one, nor any indication of a person. These rows are too big, so that means someone would have had to have dashed about 20 plus feet and hide in another black stack to have outrun me, and it didn't sound like they were running. So I call it quits there and then and head back down, telling my supervisor that the shelves were too tight for the other books. Recently, however, she sent me to shelve books at least once a week, and some patron, God knows why, seems to solely take books from the 3rd floor. To combat the skeptics who might say it's a wiring issue or faulty lighting, we have had the campus maintenance team up there a handful of times, and more for the stack, and they can absolutely find nothing wrong with it. I've also been asking around and am not the only one who feels watched on the 3rd floor. Not only this, one of my female friends went into one of the corners of the stacks looking for a book, and felt the temperature drop down so much she began to shiver and almost fainted. This was when it was about 80 or so degrees outside. I had been single for a very long time. My kids kept telling me to get back in the swing of things, but I kept making excuses. My nephew told me about this dating site. He said there was no harm in talking to people, so I tried it out. I put everything out there, so there were no surprises when or if they met me. I thought that if they still contacted me after reading all I had described about myself, and we matched, then perhaps I would have a coffee with them. I matched with a few and the conversation went well. I met with one gentleman who was way too regimental for my crazy life, and kindly declined any more involvement with him. Another guy seemed too pushy and acted like I should be honored to be in his presence. And then came Richard. I had very low self-esteem at the time. That being said, Richard seemed great. We carried on conversations for hours. He lived an hour and a half away, so all we really could do was talk to each other. We talked about our kids, dreams, goals. My daughter even friended one of his sons on Facebook. I was a secretary for some self-help meetings in my town, and he was going to school to be a counselor. Perfect, right? Well, we talked for at least 4 months, but after a while I noticed that he kept having small problems come up. Arguments with his mum, with whom he was living. No money for gas, his truck broke down, his eldest boy was mad at him. Just little things, you know? Not anything that would set me off. But it was his, "Oh me, to heck with it" attitude. I tried to let it go and really be a positive influence in his life. His mother and boys loved me and told me that they had never seen him so happy. Time went on and we were still talking every day. I had an opportunity to come see him, and of course my daughter went with me, so she could meet his son in person as well. I took him and his son out to eat at the only little coffee shop in that town. I knew I was on a fixed income, but I paid anyway because he was going to school and didn't have an income as of yet. We had a good time. We met at his son's house on the hilltop town, and we were having such a good time that I didn't even notice that snow was coming down hard and the roads were icing up. So my daughter and I stayed the night in one of his rooms. It seemed like the closer we got to his family, the more distant they became to him. It was odd. The next day the roads were clear. We said our goodbyes and I went home. Before we left, I received one extra hug from his son's mother-in-law. She whispered in my ear, "Don't fall for him." I thought that maybe there was something she didn't like about me. That came out of left field. The next few days we didn't talk, which I thought was odd. Did I do something wrong? Someone from the self-help meeting told me that there was a man looking for me. She said that he looked disheveled and smelled like alcohol. This wasn't a surprise, because I had helped quite a few people get back on their feet, and maybe this one fell off the wagon and just needed to talk. As I was driving down the street, I saw a truck in my driveway. I didn't recognize it at first, but it was him. He found out where I lived and was sitting in front of my house. At first, I was happy, until I looked in his truck and saw him slumped over reeking of booze. At that point, my fixed mode set in, and I asked him in for some strong coffee. He told me that he had a blowout with his mother, and she kicked him out and his boys won't talk to him. I got him some clean clothes and told him to take a shower. I figured we could sort it out the next day. In the meantime, I was taking him to a meeting. He sobered up and agreed to go. The whole time at the meeting, my friends were acting like I had lost my mind. Did they see something I was blind of? We went back to my house and he seemed okay. Almost too okay, like nothing at all happened. My son pulled me aside and told me he didn't like him much, but thought maybe he was just being overprotective. I should have paid attention. We went to the store because I wasn't prepared for the extra mouth, and bought 4 2-liters of soda, a gallon of milk, and 2 Monsters for him and my son, some chips and stuff for dinner. After we ate, we all watched TV and headed off to bed. I let him sleep in the spare bed in my room, but in the middle of the night he tried to get frisky. At that point, no. My grown kids were in the other room and something just didn't sit well with me, like he wasn't the same man he was before. The next morning, my daughter came running out of the bathroom angry. She said in a loud voice, "Someone pissed all over the toilet." He didn't say a word. Later, we were all eating breakfast, and he started to let food drip out of his mouth onto the table and floor, and was spitting food as he was talking. He took 3 2-liters and drank them back to back, letting some run down his chin. Then, yes, there's more, he took the remote and started to set recordings for his favorite shows, deleting a few of my grandchildren's recordings set for weeks in advance. Wait. What are you doing, my friend? This isn't cool, I told him, but he acted like I said nothing. Then he went to the refrigerator and told me that I have to go to the store and buy more soda and stuff, as it was all gone. He even drank my son's Monster and the whole gallon of milk. At this point, my daughter was also livid, so she contacted his son, and he proceeded to tell her that his mum kicked him out the house because he wouldn't get a job and was stealing money and eating them out of house and home. His other son won't talk to him because he keeps asking for money and won't pay it back. He himself was mad at him for lying to me by telling me that he was going to school when he wasn't and was using me as his next big meal ticket. Well, that was it. I got all his stuff together, took it to his truck and asked him to leave. It doesn't end there. He had loosened some bolts on his transmission, making it impossible to move. He begged and pleaded with me to stay. He was at the point snot was coming out of his nose. He said he just wanted to be close to me and that if that meant sleeping in his truck, he would and that he couldn't live without me. Well, hell to the no. I called his oldest son and told them that if they didn't come with a tow truck and get their dad, his fate wasn't going to be nice. They arrived 2 hours later, apologizing for his father's actions. We found out through his son that for many years he had gone through many unhealthy relationships and took advantage of a lot of women that fell for his lies. He is still trying to friend me on Facebook to this day. This guy was a truck driver down in Australia, driving those huge land trains across the long outback roads. These are seriously lengthy journeys, and back then, every driver who wanted to make the delivery on time went past their max hours. As you might imagine, you get very tired, and it was common to hear drivers talk of hallucinations. So this guy is in the middle of his trip, driving along the dark, empty road, when he sees something big move onto the road. An elephant. Big grey beast, giant ears and a trunk, in the middle of the Australian outback, right where he's heading at speed. Of course, he's feeling pretty awake now, and swerves out to avoid hitting this thing, manages to miss it, but loses control of the vehicle and comes off the road. Mr. Trucker gets out unscratched, and looks back. Nothing on the road. Crikey, he thinks to himself. Bloody hallucination. He checks his vehicle to make sure it's all okay, losing lots of time before getting back in and getting to his destination slightly late. He unloads his stuff, loads up with another delivery, and goes back the way he came. So here's Mr. Trucker driving down the same road again, still tired, making his way through the outback, when he sees it again. Not this again, he thinks. He's not losing any more time, he says. So he shuffles in his seat to keep his foot on the gas, and he plows straight into a 5-ton elephant, kills the elephant, totals the truck, and does not make it home in time for neighbors. Turns out the elephant had escaped from a circus that was traveling around at the time. Since then, my dad made sure, no matter how ridiculous something seemed, he, as he is a truck driver, always swerved. We were a bunch of naive kids traveling abroad in 1992, and our 2-week beach vacation turned into 2 nights of horror. Ever since our sophomore year, my high school gang of friends dreamed and planned for an epic trip to Cancun in Mexico. One of us saw a movie and thought it would be an amazing destination for us to escape the New England winter and celebrate surviving the high school experience. There were 6 of us on the plan. Keith, our unofficial leader, lost his dad his junior year, and so this trip became our way of keeping him thinking ahead to something good. Greg and Kirk were big history and archaeology buffs, so they were as interested in the Mayan ruins as the beach and beer. Dorothy and Hannah were gamer girls, a rare thing in my area, and were up for a trip to the beach with their big brothers, and I was just looking forward to an adventure. Unfortunately, we couldn't go the year we graduated. Some of us had to put our savings towards college or other experiences, and 2 of us got jobs that wouldn't allow the time off. Despite this, we had a pact to make it happen. A year passed, then another. It was 5 years before Keith phoned us to say he had booked not just a room or suite for us, but an entire house on the beach for 2 weeks. 5 of us were back in our hometown for the holidays, and we met up at a bar and had a great reunion. And Keith showed us the brochure he received from the travel company. The place was gorgeous, almost gaudy in its gold trimmings and ritzy amenities. Clearly the house was going to be expensive, even split 6 ways. But it wasn't. In fact, it was a bargain for 2 weeks. What's wrong with it? That was Kirk's question. But we all were thinking it. Keith explained that it's the hurricane that swept through and had depressed the local economy. So these outlying properties were booking to try and keep up with the more prosperous city of Cancun. The house was nearer the village of Puerto Juarez, but near all the same attractions as Tulum and Ixmal. And we could go to any beach we wanted, take a boat trip to Isla Mujeres or even Belize if we wanted to, for a third of our original estimate. We tentatively agreed because we knew Keith vetted the place before committing to it. He had already put down the deposit and set the weeks based on the hold, and we all put it in the calendar. It was late in the season of the following year. The truth was that we were all getting older and moving on. Some of us were in relationships and planning for weddings. Greg already had a baby on the way with his fiancée, so time was running out on our childhood dream before we would part ways for good. Fast forward 9 months and the day arrived. I had digested travel guides and had everything I needed. I took the cheapest flight, which meant layovers and switching gates, so I arrived later in the afternoon. I happened to meet Dorothy at the baggage claim. We remarked how grown up we both looked, shared a few hugs and agreed to share a cab to our vacation villa. We waited in a long line to be married up with one of the taxis lining the arrival area, caught up on the latest gossip and life events, and entered vacation mode. Dorothy was getting married in the spring and moving to Europe. Hannah had to back out at the last minute because of work, but sent her love. When it was our turn, we were paired with this old, rusty bucket of Chevy steel driven by an older man who swept us up with the grace of a ballroom dancer and the smile of a car salesman looking to make quota. His name was Paulo, and he wasted no movement getting our bags into the trunk and us in the back seat. "Where do we go?" I gave him the address, and he looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Eh?" I repeated, and he nodded, still somehow confused. After reporting to someone on the radio and including the address twice, it sounded like even the dispatcher was confused. He switched turn signals and began to merge right against the flow of traffic, exiting the airport towards the city. He quoted us a price and I agreed. We headed down an empty lane into the growing shadow of dusk while most folks were heading into the bright lights of Cancun. The road was 2 lanes and covered with litter. Shortly beyond the on-ramp, we passed a tent city crowded with people and torches being lit to illuminate families living in squalor. Toddlers and children without clothes sat in the dirt and under makeshift tent homes. Further down the road, beached vessels lay on their sides, sunken into the sand or soil. Families with the means had converted them into homes by cutting holes in the hull to make doorways and windows. Stray, skinny dogs and cats patrolled the roads for food, stopping to glare as we drove slowly past. There were few people on the road in the growing darkness. We had moved into the long shadow of the Yucatan rainforest, on a road following the beach. The ocean was dazzling in the early evening, and Dorothy focused on that while I kept an eye inland. Paulo, too, wasn't as cheerful or talkative once he knew where we were going. "You know people in Puerto Juarez?" he said. I shook my head. No, a friend rented a house. Rented a house? He nodded, pretending to understand but remained skeptical. It's a very dangerous place. You must be very careful. Dorothy stiffened in her seat a bit. We had entered the forest just a bit, which obscured her view of the beach. She looked at me as if to ask, what did we get into? A mile more down the road, we emerged from the trees to again drive along the beach, inland. Bright, jaundiced security lights bathed a strip mall which included a market and a few odd shops. The only market was opened and housed half a dozen or so taxis with drivers enjoying beers and sodas in the parking lot. Paolo honked and waved as we passed the men that cheered. He smiled, and the presence of pleasant people relaxed us a bit, but his smile faded as soon as we went around the corner. Another half-mile or so and the road was dark. In the headlights, we made out some figures in the distance standing in the road. A few teenagers were standing in the road. A couple held flashlights and all of them carried heavy sticks, and Paolo began to slow down. Gang of kids, Paolo said. They want to collect the toll. Dorothy grabbed my arm. I had heard about something like this. How much? Paolo shook his head. We no stop. He accelerated towards the kids on the road, and at the last moment, they dove for the shoulders as the taxi roared through. Dorothy dove into my lap, and we ducked down as the back of the taxi was pelted with rocks. We continued on. Paolo got on the radio and reported it, then mumbled to himself, perhaps regretting getting this fare. We arrived at the address shortly after. Despite the photographs emphasizing the dazzling facade and gardens, the exterior of the property was wrapped in a 20-foot wall of concrete, clocks topped with layers of clumpy cement into which hundreds of jagged bottle pieces were mounted in place of what might have been barbed or razor wire. The driveway was blocked by a tall steel gate and an intercom. Paolo had to buzz in. The gate whined and scraped open against the corrosion and lack of lubrication, taking forever to open wide enough for us to enter. All the while, Paolo and I kept watch on the darkness for sign of those kids on the road. As soon as we got into the property, Paolo kept insisting that they close the gate, as he pulled under an overhang at the door. Fortunately, the gate began to close itself. The front door opened, and our three buzzed dude bros poured out onto the driveway. They firemen handled our luggage into the house, and we all began to hug and laugh. Paolo kept watch on the gate, distracted as Keith asked him about the possibility of driving them to Chichen Itza the next morning. Late, of course, so that they could sleep in and have breakfast. Once the gate was closed, Paolo was himself again. Sure, he would be happy to take 3, maybe 4 in his taxi. It would take an all-day trip, and he quoted the price. Keith agreed, and Paolo prepared to head out. You keep the place tight so the bedbugs no bite. I come back 9 tomorrow. Keith let the warning slip over his head. It occurred to me that he, Greg, and Kirk got there during the day, so they most likely had a much more positive experience than we did. Paolo waited outside the gate to make sure it closed before driving off. I also noticed he was returning to town with a wingman in a taxi, who turned around on the road to hail him. The house had been carefully photographed to avoid capturing ugly concrete walls. Some of the walls looked to have been recently rebuilt, and the older blocks had holes in the interior that were patched up with cement. We went inside where the guys had already started playing D&D and drinking. The interior of the house exceeded the grandeur alleged by the photos. The place had a sunken living room with comfortable sofas and chairs, a spiral staircase up to the sleeping level, and a massive dining area with a chef's kitchen attached. We got the quick tour of the place, but Dorothy and I were both exhausted from a day of travel, capped by the ride from the airport. We both had cervezas from the fridge, noting that the pantry had been stocked by the owner prior to our arrival. Keith had already cooked dinner, but we were able to feed off the remaining fajitas and bowls of junk food on the gaming table. I didn't want to roll up a character so late in the evening, but I hung out at the table with my friends, happy to listen to the pattern of our gaming once again. We were all older, spoke a little slower, and thoughtfully, but it was like being home. One of the things I noticed about the house was that it didn't look out onto the beach, at least not directly. The tall concrete wall blocked the view from our first floor patio. The pool was lit from inside, casting the yard in a peaceful blue glow. Linking the property to the beach was another tall steel security gate, through which I could make out a narrow sliver through the light of the rising crescent moon. This made sense in a way. Under Mexican law, all beaches were public spaces. The property line ended at the wall. My thought was interrupted by something Keith said. "The phone doesn't work." "What?" "Yeah, we were tired, so we were going to call for a taxi to take us into town to a restaurant, but the phone doesn't work." I felt a little nervous about that. None of us had cell phones. Keith, however, didn't seem bothered. "The owner's great. He lives in Puerto Juarez. I'll get in touch with him after we get back from the pyramids tomorrow night." Dorothy and I hadn't planned to take the long trip to the pyramids. We both planned to ease into the vacation by taking a trip to the beach and getting tanned. I wasn't comfortable spending the entire day without a lifeline. It wasn't an insurmountable problem, as I started working out ways to maybe take a cab into Puerto Juarez in the morning for Keith and see if I could fix the problem. A loud buzzer sounded, and all of us jumped. The same echoed through the entire main floor, like a game show buzzer sounding at the incorrect answer, except for longer. As soon as it stopped, it buzzed again. Keith rose from his chair and walked over to a small alcove, presumably to open the gate. "Don't open the gate," Dorothy and I said in a duet. Kirk and Greg laughed. Keith stopped and shot us an odd look as the buzzer sounded yet again. "I'm not." He opened a panel in the alcove that contained a small security monitor and intercom. He squinted to see what was on the monitor. I stood up and walked over. As I did, Keith muttered, "Bunch of kids." One kid was mugging for the camera and crushing the buzzer. It was a fuzzy image, but the fisheye lens in the security light gave us a look of about 10 people, not just kids, but men, women, and a few dogs milling around them. The one gazing into the camera wanted to be seen. It might have been the lateness of the hour or my own paranoia, but I recognized him as one of the kids blocking the road on our way to the house. "Ignore them," I suggested. The buzzer went off and everyone got annoyed. Dorothy put her face in her hands. It bothered her more than the rest for some reason. "Can you kill that buzzer?" "I dunno," Keith shrugged. He searched the intercom and hit the power button. The buzzer ended abruptly. It seemed as though the kid mashing the button knew this, because he immediately stopped and stepped back from the panel. He glared at the camera, the light washing out all his features except his eyes, full of mischief and a little anger. The group huddled together in the small groups, backs turned to the camera. Keith, unnerved by this, flipped the power back on and pushed the talk button. I didn't have time to say anything against this. "Hey, what can we do for you guys?" The group laughed so hard we could hear them inside the house. The kid stepped up to the intercom again, pressed the talk button and said something in Spanish that I barely made out to mean he wanted food and booze, and maybe to come inside and party with us. In English, he added, "We can bring in women and some ganja. Have a real good time, see?" We all looked at one another, not to discuss the proposal, but the ridiculousness of it. "Sorry, we're all partied out," Keith said, thinking of calling it a night. The gang outside talked amongst themselves for a bit. The spokesperson considered this and then hit the talk button again. "No, I don't think you'll sleep tonight." And the group ran off in different directions, and the spokeskid grinning wide as he glared into the camera and backed away. He left the camera heading around the exterior wall. Dorothy stood up and went looking for something that turned out to be a bottle of tequila. She was shaking. Greg went to talk to her because they had always been close. I had learnt later that Dorothy and her fiancé were victims of a home invasion 6 months ago in Baltimore. They were tied up and robbed at gunpoint in the middle of the night. This was a massive trigger for her. "We need eyes upstairs," Keith said. "Someone needs to be able to see over the wall. I have security cameras here and there, beachside." Kirk and I had looked at the spiral stairs up the landing. Keith called up, "Keep the lights off." We did. I went to a beachside bedroom and peered out the sliding glass door to the balcony. There was no window overlooking the side of the house. They were probably clinging to the wall to avoid to be seen. I sat on the king-size bed and quickly decided that that was a bad idea because I immediately felt sleepy, despite the adrenaline of being put under siege, and I stood up. Just then, a volley of stones rose from behind the wall. A dozen or more softball and golf ball sized stones caught in the light of the pool area, smashing down on the sand and concrete. Some made it to the balcony, bouncing off the metal railings before rolling into the pool. The crackling stones sounded like gunfire, and Dorothy screamed from the other room. Immediately, the backyard and beach were flooded with white light from the towers erected at the corners of the property. The jagged glass atop the walls sparkled, and I could see shadows cast towards the surf and the top of the heads as small groups stepped back and launched another volley of stones. Some aimed at the lights, while others came soaring at the patio window. None of the rocks aimed at the building reached the windows, they bounced off the railing or the patio overhang. The rocks aimed at the lights just bounced off without effect. Kirk called my name from the front of the house, and I rushed out of the room, down the hall, and into a smaller bedroom where he was pointing out to the front wall. Someone had thrown a heavy blanket up over the top of the wall, a thick one, like one of the moving blankets they rent at U-Haul. He made out the top of a ladder. I looked around for whatever reason and picked up the old radio clock beside the twin bed. I yanked the cord out, wrapped it around the clock, and Kirk gave me the look he gives when I do something stupid or pointless in our weekly D&D game. It wasn't until I got outside on the patio that my conscious brain caught up with what I was going to do. Just as a man's head peeked over the wall, I launched the clock as hard as I could like a frisbee across the yard, the 30 feet or so in his direction. It flew low to one side, but shattered when it hit the glass and concrete, showering the man in shrapnel. It hurt, and startled him enough that he slipped off the ladder out of sight. He landed with a crash and a painful cry. The floodlights burst to life in the front of the house, lighting up the road beyond. A handful of frightened kids scattered carrying their friend who looked really hurt. The sound of stones hitting the house continued out back, and there was shouting. Kirk ran back to where Dorothy and Greg were huddled together in the bedroom, and I heard him shout, "Make sure they're not scaling the walls out back or charging the gate." Convinced they had abandoned their charge on the front wall, I returned to the rear bedroom and gathered the white stones that had ended up on the patio. Plumes of white smoke rose from outside the walls, curling in the security lights. Some more rocks flew into the yard, but they were all weak hurls landing into the pool with no effect. With about 8 stones in my arms, I returned to the main floor. Keith was at the alcove switching between 3 monitors and a black screen. "They got one of the side cameras," he said. "What are they burning?" "I think they're burning the beach furniture." Half of them ran off. The other ones are back, and the older ones, and someone started launching Roman candles at the house from the beach. Dorothy began screaming as the fireball struck the overhang and sliding glass door. Bottle rockets followed along with an assortment of small explosives. A couple of quarter sticks landed just inside the wall, and the concussive power rattled the windows. One destroyed a deck chair and turned the small flower garden into a crater. Then it stopped. The security light remained on for 5 minutes until a lack of motion reset the compound in darkness. We had to adjust, and it was a frightening moment as Keith scanned the security cameras for a long while. There were no signs of them. Kirk suggested they run up the road or beach, but then the kid from the monitor walked up to the front gate again, a big grin on his face, and was carrying a handgun, displayed clearly for us to see on the monitor. He shook the camera and pushed the talk button. "No, I don't think you're gonna sleep tonight." He spit on the camera and walked away. None of us did, except for Dorothy, if you count passing out from tequila and horror. We estimated we had about 7 hours until dawn. Kirk argued that everyone who came out was either asleep or celebrating their victory over the tourists back at whatever clubhouse they shared. He wasn't ready to sleep though. We sat in candlelight to get the best view outside the windows. Greg patrolled upstairs for a while and then joined us in the dining room. The doors were open and the screen shut so we could hear anyone gathering out back, but only heard the gentle roll of surf. "If they come back, the lights will go on," Greg said. "If the police drive by and see that rug on the wall, maybe they'll check in." To be honest, we hadn't seen any lights, except that of the moon and the ocean since the gang departed. It was a beautiful scene. To be honest, I tried to relax and have a few Coronas to help, but we told stories of our glory days to keep awake, and even had to shush ourselves from keeping from waking Dorothy. It was around 3 in the morning when the security light out front goes on again. We didn't have the energy to be startled, but responded immediately. I checked the security monitor. It was a couple of people there to collect the ladder and the rug. Pulling the rug down triggered the lights, and they quickly ran off back up the road into the dark. Tiny pixels of light shone in the distance as they switched on flashlights. The rest of the morning remains a fuzzy memory. I may have drifted off, and may have the others, but none of us slept. Sunrise gave us all the confidence, and Keith immediately conspired with Greg and Kirk to power nap before Paolo returned to take them on the all-day trip inland. I said we should go to the police and get the phone fixed before the 3 of them left the property in the hands of an exhausted me and already terrified Dorothy. Shortly after dawn, Dorothy came downstairs in a swimsuit, walked past us without a word and walked into the pool. She dunked herself and began fishing stones out from the bottom. I helped Keith make breakfast and things began returning to normal. Keith agreed to postpone the trip until we could file a complaint and get the phone settled. We ate and agreed to ask Paolo to put us in touch with the authorities. When the buzzer sounded again, we all jumped a little, but it was Paolo. We let him into the compound. He was dressed for comfort, ripped jean shorts and an old golf shirt with sandals. We explained the night before and he didn't seem surprised, except for the part about the phone being out. He walked with Keith around the side and confirmed his suspicion that the line had been cut outside the wall. The line could be fixed, but just as easily be cut again. With this done, Keith phoned the owner to let him know what had happened. According to Keith, he feigned concern and promised to use his connections in Cancun and Puerto Juarez to increase police patrols the next night and hand over the security tape to the officers who would come and investigate. Convinced this would solve all our problems, Keith, Kirk and Greg left the house late, but to put in the full day's hours away at the Chichen Itza site. Paolo pulled me aside and handed me a small metal case. He patted me on the shoulder as if confident I'd know what to do with it. Inside was a handgun with 2 magazines. Startled, I took it inside and wiped it down for prints, but I kept it in the kitchen. Dorothy said nothing all day, getting out the pool and showering. She sat on the patio outside the dining room and read a book. When the police showed up 4 hours later, I brought them in and explained everything. One of them spoke English well enough and explained the house we rented had been owned by a local drug trafficker. He wasn't exactly a kingpin, but he was able to keep a nice residence until his life was terminated. It was brought up by a local businessman, but tourists, for some reason, didn't like the idea of being this far away from the protected tourist zone. The kids were probably locals with nothing better to do than harass Americans, and we should relax and have a good time. They didn't even want to see the playback, they just took the VHS tape and wished us well, assuring us that a car would drive by at least once an hour overnight. I didn't mention that a lot could happen in an hour's time. I kept checking the phone line, as if the sudden lack of a dial tone was my first alert for trouble. I thought that if they could cut the phone, they could probably cut the power almost as easily, but I didn't share any of this with Dorothy. I made lunch, but Dorothy didn't want to eat. She didn't want to talk either. She sat tensely in the sitting room with her book. I collected the stones from the pool area and piled them by the door. I cleaned up the debris and then spent some hours soothing my nerves with beer, Jimmy Buffett songs, and a network of pool needles serving as a raft. The guys never settled on a time they should return. Paulo said not to even try because they had to drive through the jungle and there might be any number of delays or detours. It was best to be home by sundown. So when the sun fell behind the trees that second night and they had not returned, I started to get concerned. There had been talks of playing a D&D adventure or just some card game that night, so their intention was not to be out too late. Dorothy had taken a nap in the middle of the day, but never went back outside after her swim. She returned to her chair with another book and went right into it. She refused dinner, but I made her something anyway, hoping the smell would just jumpstart her appetite. I felt like a well-treated prisoner. People walked along the road outside the compound, sometimes peering into the upstairs window to catch a glimpse at the tourists. Others lounged on the beach beyond the gate. It was probably safe for us to go out there, but we weren't taking a chance. In the end, the night fell over the house again, and with just Dorothy and me inside it. When the security lights went off again, it was around 8 in the evening. I had drifted off. It was the front side of the house, and I didn't see anyone outside the wall. When I got to the front door and looked out the peephole, I saw one man standing in the yard. He didn't have a weapon in his hand, but I wasn't sure if he was armed. He just stood there in the floor light staring at the front door, then to one side of the unused garage, and then to the downstairs bedroom on the opposite side. Dorothy got up and went to the phone. There was a dial tone, but dialing 911 left her with a dead line. She tried a few more times without success. At that moment, the buzzer sounded. Fearing another attack, I retreated to the security monitors and saw Paulo's cab outside. I buzzed them through. When the gate began to move, the man in the yard fled to the back of the house. It took a while for the car to get inside, and I moved to get the weapon from the case in the kitchen. The man raced to the back gate. As I suspected, it was accessible from the inside as he threw it open. As he did, about 5 men rushed forwards, only to be stopped by the man inside and motioned to run, which they all did. With the rest of the gang back in the compound, Paulo told us he radioed police when he saw a bunch of creeps outside the wall. They were at the market and were on their way. The 3 men were deeply tanned and a little drunk from their experience, which they promised had a moment similar to the night before. Soon after, the police arrived outside the compound and they interviewed Paulo and the rest of us. They had Polaroids of the people they caught near the marketplace and took our word when we positively identified them as the man in the yard and the others trying to get in. It was all they needed to not only arrest them, but to round up the other kids that harassed us the previous night. Settling in, I returned the weapon to Paulo, but he offered to sell it to me for $50. I can't say if I took him up on it or not, but the rest of us felt a lot safer for the remaining 12 days of our trip. We even took to the beach as a group. It took a while, but Dorothy began to settle in. After 3 nights of no issues, we all slept through the night and had the adventures we'd been dreaming of for 8 years. This happened to me way back in my college life. I still live in Asia. I was in a boys' dormitory, and it was a 5-story dormitory building. In front of our dormitory is the all-girls dormitory. There, the paranormal activity happened. The same building with us, 5-story too, same building plan since the owner of the dormitory is the same. It's like copy-paste blueprints on each side of the road. I met this girl who was in that dormitory. We happened to see each other every morning and along the way to school, making me have an excuse to walk with her every morning. She's pretty and friendly, so knowing her wasn't that hard. We were also at the same university, just at a different program. I was in civil engineering, and she was in chemical engineering. I'm a 3rd grade college student, while she's a fresh one. Let's say older college boy appeal, better to freshman girls. So we get on the dating scene fast, and got hooked up pretty quickly. I kind of befriended the night shift security, and I know the security guard since I always greet him whenever I walk her every night. I bribed him one night, so that I could stay up there. The dormitory have this strict rule of no visitors 24 hours, and the girls' dormitory has a curfew of 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., but they lack CCTV. She didn't share a room, she rented the solo room, which cost the same amount as what we pay for a room of 4. Our first night was awesome, but I had to go around 4 a.m. and return to my own dormitory. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I woke up and got ready to go outside. I didn't wake her since we still had class later. I got out of her room, then in the hallway. On my right is straight on their toilet, which is shared, then on my left was leading to stairs. I was about to go down the stairs when I heard a door opening, so I ducked, quickly walked down the stairs slowly. I didn't want to cause a noise. She's in the 4th floor, so I have a long way to go. I was at the middle of a landing of the stairs leading to the 3rd floor, when someone called me. Hey! I got startled and looked up. There wasn't anyone there. I figured it out that it could be her. Her voice is like whispering, or somehow low with a kind of horsey husk. I went upstairs again to look, but there's no one there. I got some chills, but it was almost 4 a.m. and security shift is around 4:30, so I headed down. Then again, I was in the landing and I heard her voice 2 consecutive times. I went upstairs again, but there's no one. I turn around and say screw it. Run to the 2nd floor and I heard it again, a chuckle or giggle, and I rushed to the ground floor, saw the security guard sleeping, and passed him and went straight to my own door. I woke up late, missed 2 classes that day, and several phone calls from her and my friends. My dorm mates didn't wake me. I called her and asked her to meet me at this fast food place where we usually eat lunch, and explained everything that happened. She told me it was the ghost of the girl who ended her life tragically in that building. Well, I got creeped out by that. She told me that the girl did it because she got pregnant and her lover left her. Depressed and afraid of her parents, she ended her own life. I asked her where she got the info from, and she said that the janitor told her about it. From that day onwards, I didn't return to her dorm. I didn't take my chances of seeing that ghost girl again. It was Friday night. My weekend had just begun. I was on Xbox Live and playing Overwatch and eating now cold pizza, like lots of my friends were. I was kicking considerable ass more than I usually would at this game, and was on fire. For non-Overwatch players, that basically means you're doing really good. At around 2 a.m, I decided to step up my game and go into competitive mode. I got into a match at King's Row, and I was playing Pharaoh on defense. I got a 15-player kill streak, but noticed 5 of these kills were on the same guy, a Bastion. I remember his username. The match goes on for another minute, and then I get an invite to a party. The gamer tag was the same as the Bastion I had killed for the 6th time. I wasn't in a party, since all my friends had called it a night, except for me at that point. I decide that whatever he wanted to say could be interesting, so I added him. Now I usually expect some kids a few years younger than me to be talking slack, but to my surprise it was a grown man on the other end. More to my surprise, he sounded in his 30s rather than close to my age, and he had a thick Spanish accent. Immediately this guy starts cussing me out. I can't lie when I say I half expected this to happen when I got a party invite. Now I have the mentality that when you're a jerk to me, I'll return the favor, and replied with the classic, "Oh, you mad, bro?" The guy doesn't acknowledge what I say. Instead, he starts raging on me and saying how he's going to do terrible things to my entire family. Some of the things he said sort of shocked me, but I was just like, "Bro, take a chill pill." "No, I don't want," and then he stopped. I noticed why. ADVA on our team had just killed his Bastion hero again. Now this is where things get scary. It sounded as if he turned into a rabid animal that was trying to suffocate itself in the mic, screaming, howling and spitting. It's difficult to describe exactly what sound he was making. Inhumane noises were coming from the other end of the mic, as if he were being gutted and possessed by a demon at the same time. It was a grown man, which made the entire thing scary compared to laughing my butt off when a 12-year-old loses it. The match ended, the enemy team didn't even get payload moving, and the man loses his mind. I decided to be an ass again, and not take this guy's crap. Look, it's not my fault you're not good at the game. You're just being treated like a child. Grow up, man. The Spanish guy didn't like this. He screamed down the microphone for 20 seconds. It started getting all crackly. He then removed me from the party. And since the match was over, I called it a night. My overall reaction to what went down was, well, that was something. I logged out, turned off my Xbox and went to bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I realized how much of a dumbass I was for not recording it for my friends. They would have lost it when they heard it. Then I fell asleep. Saturday went by with nothing, and I thought that was that with the angry Spaniard. The next day I logged into my Xbox to play more Overwatch, and noticed I had a message from the guy. "Good morning." "Good morning, Johnny. I know you have to go to the movie theater down in Ashford tomorrow." "What the hell?" I said out loud. I decided to pull out my phone and take a picture of the TV screen. I then texted my boss about it and told her that some guy on Xbox somehow found out where I worked. Now my boss is a mean old lady, so she naturally didn't care about what happened on Xbox, even though it concerned my work. She just blew it off and told me I still had to come into work the next day. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Incredibles 2 were both hot then, and it was going to be busy. I ended up coming in next day at 5:30. It was pretty boring and busy like I predicted. Up until around 8, when a super short guy came in through the door. It was loud and crowded, but the guy hollered my full name. Some thick Spanish accent, the same one from Xbox. It was him. I still to this day don't know where he got my info from or why he decided to come all the way out to where I worked. The theater fell silent. I just walked to the back room where my boss was and told her that the guy from Xbox was inside. She repeated, "I don't care what happens to you on Xbox, get to work, we're busy." I repeated to her that the guy was inside the building. I didn't know if he wanted to hurt me or not, and that I was going to call the cops. I called them, and it wasn't until they arrived and spoke to me privately in the back room that my boss ended up taking me seriously. The Spanish guy was still inside the lobby, and the cops put him in cuffs and walked him out. This is according to my boss, as I was in the back room and couldn't witness it. I still haven't heard anything from them, and I still don't know how he found my information or why he came all the way to where I worked. And I still don't know what he planned to do to me. Either way, I'm still a bit shaken up over it. I don't know if he knows my home address or not. and I'm pretty much on guard 24/7. Either way, I own 2 dogs that can scare anyone off, but I'm still pretty terrified of this guy. I contacted my police department a little later and heard they had taken the guy on Monday, so I have the satisfaction knowing that he didn't get away. They're still being stingy on the info and won't even tell me his name because of all the security garbage. I'm waiting for a full report on this guy. They promised they would give me one soon. I don't know how long it's gonna be, but I'm just gonna try and not focus on that guy for now. So insane, pissed off guy from Xbox Live that stalks teenagers and visits them, I hope I never have to meet you again. I'm a chubby male, so creepers tend to leave me alone. When I was 19, I lived in Kentucky, pretty far from my North Michigan hometown. It was this little town called Pikeville, where there was very little crime. I actually kind of miss it, but I digress. My family came down to visit me for my birthday that year, and we agreed to meet up at the Hardys in town the morning after they arrived. I got there a lot earlier than them, and me being the type to show up 15 minutes early to everything, and them being the type who show up late. As I was standing outside waiting, this guy walks up to me. If you've ever lived in a place like this, you'll know everyone is super friendly, so it didn't strike me as odd when he began talking to me. During our conversation, all kinds of alarm bells should have gone off. Like after he found out I was in college, he said he saw me at a party. This is impossible, as I never once went out to a party. When he found out that I'm a gamer nerd, he started talking all about playing D&D all the time. He kept taking sips out of some alcohol bottle. Mind you, it's 10 AM at this point, and offered me some as well. He began talking about how he lost all his friends because he got into drugs, and I felt a little bad for him. He asked if I wanted to walk around for a bit, and since I knew my family wouldn't be there for a while, I went. This guy had been talking about how he lost all his friends due to drugs, and I felt bad for the guy. That, coupled with the fact that I hadn't encountered anyone like this, and the lack of crime kind of disarmed that warning part of my brain. We walked and spoke for a little while, maybe 10 minutes, before I realized that we were in a shady-looking part of town. I had never even realized there were shady parts of town of this small town, but here we were. We stopped in front of a house that looked long abandoned with this dark, narrow, sketchy alley next to it. He starts talking about how he knows 2 girls that live here and how they like to party. He tells me about how DTF they are and asks if I want to meet them. It was at this point my common sense finally kicks in. I'm in a bad part of town with a sketchy guy I don't know who's just talking about doing drugs and no one knows I'm here. And now he wants me to go into an obviously abandoned house under the guise of meeting some ladies. I obviously declined his offer and immediately said I needed to go back to my family as they were waiting. He seemed a little upset by this and then asked if I could help him move a pool table into his van, which was conveniently parked down the alley. I declined as well. This is when he began to reach into his jacket pocket. Since those bells started going off, I realized just how much it might look like this guy might try and shank me. At this moment, my stepmom did the only thing she ever did for me. She called me to see where I was, and I took this as an opportunity to hastily exit. The creep followed me for 3 blocks. I don't know what exactly that he wanted, but it was probably just to rob me. Still, that area has a good amount of disappearances and is one of the worst in the country for people being taken. I don't know what could have happened had I agreed, but I can't help but think that one of them is a scene from The Silence of the Lambs, where Bill lures a victim into his van. I hope he got the help he needed and is doing better, but I also hope just as much that I never have the misfortune of running into him again. I studied abroad in Oxfordshire, England, in 2012, and lived in an abbey that was built in 1215. On this day, it was a beautiful sunny day, and for some reason, I was the only one in the abbey. It was a small group of us studying here, maybe 40 to 45 altogether. I was in the library sitting on a couch located under a window that was across the room from a wall with a fireplace. The door in the library to the left of the fireplace, and I was reading a book for class when suddenly, over the top of my book in my peripheral, I saw a man walk into the room with me. He walked by the fireplace and was continuing into the room. He was a tall man, and what I noticed immediately was that he was wearing a full suit. My first thought was that it was very early morning or late afternoon, and I wondered who the heck is wearing a suit right now. I looked up from my book to acknowledge him, and no one was there. I was completely alone in the room. I got goosebumps, and my heart beat harder in my chest. But I wasn't terrified or anything. I just kind of went, okay, and kept reading my book. I had forgotten about it until a few nights later, when a friend of mine told me the receptionist had been telling her ghost stories about the Abbey. One of the stories had been that when it was quiet in the library, students reported seeing a butler walking around. A butler. I flushed bright red when she told me, and I immediately thought of the man in the suit. I went back to the library a few more times on my own when I studied there, but I never saw him again. I had went into the gas station with a co-worker to fill up on gas. When I was on my way to walk inside, this woman with long, red and matted hair kept on staring me down. I even said, "Evening, ma'am," as I went inside. As I got in, I turned and looked, and she was still staring. So I went about my business, grabbed a drink, and was fixing up a hot dog, when I see that she is still staring. I turned to my co-worker and told him she was being a creeper. My co-worker just replied she was just admiring my beauty, as smart-ass as anyone ever could be. He then later noticed that she was acting weird towards me, and as we went to leave, I mentioned to the clerk that they had a doozy on their hands, see lot lizards there all the time, and mentioned, yeah, she had ran off with people and had been there for 3 days prior to this one. Anyway, as I went to turn around and leave, she was pressed up against the door, holding them shut and staring at me. I motioned with my hand for her to move, and she took a step back. I blew through the left exit door and sprinted back to the truck. The next night, I hadn't seen her before work and thought she had left, but that night I had a pack of smokes and some gas. I entered and exited and never saw her until I was about to leave. As I put the fueling pump away, I could feel someone had come up behind me, and sure as hell it was her. I just slowly turned as I opened the door, and she tried to force her way into my truck. Luckily, another co-worker was at the pump next to mine and forced her off me, and a police officer was there to help assist and put her out in his squad car. Ever since, I tend to stay away from that place. I'm a big guy. I couldn't move an inch due to sheer fear, and even conceal and carry couldn't move a single inch. I've had a few frightening encounters over the span of my life, but nothing quite as intense as one that took place on a night during my senior year of high school. I had been managing the latest in a series of successive breakups with my high school sweetheart, and I was looking for any reason I could find not to sequester myself into my computer room as I so often did. My friend Mia, who lived in a neighboring community, had invited me over to her place to hang out with her and her brother. I was a socially awkward teenager, and Mia being a fairly recent acquaintance, I accepted on the condition that I could bring along a frequent companion of mine, Robert. He was always prepared to hang out, and I could confirm his presence there before even asking him. She was hesitant of bringing another person round, but when I promised her we'd set off some of Robert's fireworks, she agreed. Mia had conditions of her own, stressing the importance of calling her to come pick us up as soon as we arrived at the transit station. I thought it was a bit of an odd request, I had been to Mia's house before, and it was only a short walk from the station. I didn't think to ask her why, as I was just pleased to be going anywhere. "Oh, and you have to bring your fireworks," I told Robert. After grumbling, he gathered up the small cachet that he had stashed under his bed and we headed out. Robert and I arrived at the station around 11, and I did as Mia had instructed. Not expecting an invite that late in the evening, my cell phone was left uncharged, with enough juice to let Mia know that we had arrived. As Robert and I whiled away the time singing 80s tunes in an off-key rhythm, a black SUV with tinted windows came streaming into the parking area next to the station, swerving wildly and honking before it shot off into the suburban community we were heading towards. Mia arrived shortly after, and we made our way towards the schoolyard. Robert was still a bit prickly about wasting the last of his fireworks, which was fairly uncharacteristic of him, as he presented himself as one of the most habitually apathetic people I had ever met up until that point. We had set off a handful of fireworks. A few of them were duds, but most of them did what they were designed for, attracting attention. Another black SUV came barreling down the road by the school a few minutes later. This one had a collection of balloons tied to the interior of the car that flew out a rearview window, battering against one another as the SUV came to a sudden halt. Mia's face held a look of knowing concern that I didn't entirely understand. "I'll be right back," she told us. I held my breath from a distance as I witnessed a figure hop out of the passenger seat of the SUV and approach Mia. I let out a heavy sigh of relief, as their greeting, while out of earshot, was warm. There was a rapport and friendliness not commonly reserved for foreboding strangers you meet, with the hour creeping closer to midnight, and the lights in the surrounding homes growing increasingly scarce. Mia was the type of gal you couldn't help but like. She was bright, funny, talented, and never did much to offend anyone. She treated everyone on equal terms, and a natural byproduct of this is collecting friends of every high school archetype. Some of those archetypes were one of the ones I was all too familiar with, the jocks, bullies, and bad seeds, the latter of which her district high school had a notorious reputation for. By that point in my life, I was already content with the knowledge that the flaring tempers between most individuals of every identifiable clique would simmer with age. But there would always be the select few that never quite got over the thrill of illicit dealings and physical violence. Their behavior would escalate, and they'd step into the criminal lifestyle at a young adult, where their actions became less excusable. I was and still am a tiny male at 28 years old, never growing beyond 5'4", and an easy target for such a person. I had the reputation for being a mischievous but laid-back slacker who could take a punch but couldn't throw one, and I relied on the former trait to diffuse tension between situations outside my tribe. It didn't always work, but it allowed me to skate by relatively unharmed for most of my high school career. Mia embraced the stranger in a hug before they parted ways. The stranger got back into the SUV and peeled off. When she returned, I asked her what that was all about. That was a friend of mine from St. Francis High. They're out celebrating his buddy's 18th birthday and driving around and beating the crap out of people walking by themselves. You're alright if you're with me, but I think we should probably head back to my place. Fine by me. I'd rather not be party to some kid's twisted adulthood initiation rites as he proves his machismo to his buddies while they take turns packing my face in. We arrived to Mia's house, but the mood had turned pretty sour and contemplative as we sat with very little to discuss aside from the obvious. We got about 20 minutes into a movie before Mia's father walked in. "Mia, it's 12. Time to say goodnight to your friends." Mia explained the situation, but being an honest student with overly invested parents can sometimes mean bearing the burden of strict rules. One, being in bed by 12. The other, no safe harboring for teenaged boys overnight. Christ, what had we gotten ourselves into? Mia told us that there were 4 of the SUVs driving around. She asked us to be safe before saying goodbye and locking the door behind her. Robert and I slowly walked off the porch and into the cul-de-sac. A disappointing evening, but it happens. I took my cell phone from my pocket to trouble my best friend for a ride, but had forgotten that I didn't charge it earlier and the battery had since died. Robert didn't bother to carry a cell phone with him and communicated with the few people he did hang out with over MSN Messenger. We took inventory of what we had left with us before taking off towards the transit station. My pockets were virtually empty, save for my wallet. Robert had a single remaining firework in his possession, along with his Zippo lighter. There was a house down the street that I recalled was being renovated, with one of those industrial-shaped disposal bins out front. I leapt inside and re-emerged hefting a 2x4 with a few nails bent into it. Robert laughed at the visual. "Call me Buford Pusser Jr. I am walking small," I cracked. Robert had his Zippo and a firework at the ready. "I'll shoot this in their face," he said. It sounded as if we were in high spirits. It's because the risk of our situation hadn't quite sunken in yet. We were aware that the transit station would be shutting relatively soon, and the train wouldn't be any help, and this particular station held the final terminal on the line, but the buses might still be active. The neighborhood we had started in had enough walkways, bike lanes, and tree cover that we could sink our way through the shadows for a while. We took our time choosing the most secluded and unlit passageways, which in hindsight I realized did nothing to help our nerves. At one point we came up to an intersecting walkway that we were familiar with in the daytime. The passageway ahead of us was lit overhead by a single yellow streetlight, before fading into the yawning mouth of pitch darkness. We stood there, agonizing for several minutes over whether or not we should find another route or stay the course, listening for any sound of movement on the other side. We briefly contemplated camping out for the remainder of the night before opting for another detour. The night's silence was punctuated every so often by the squealing of tires, shouting, or the sudden acceleration of a vehicle. Then we reached the main road. Not only one of the main roads in the area, but one of the main roads in our end of town. From there on there was little cover, nothing but houses, buildings, and a large empty parking lot, all illuminated by streetlights that, at that moment, felt more like the halogen floodlights they shine on escaped prisoners as they rush across the yard to freedom. There was little traffic at this point in the night, so if one of the SUVs did come down the road, we would not go unnoticed, and there'd be virtually nothing to stop them from doing what they were intending to do. We listened for any sign of obnoxious motors revving before we took off across the road and into the parking lot. Less than a minute later, we arrived at the transit station. We quickly checked the posted bus times, but as indicated by the digital clock outside, all the buses had made their final run. We hopped into the shelter in the train terminal, but the doors had already been locked. We'd have to stick to the main road until we made it to the bus trap. The bus trap was our safe haven. What's unique to this bus trap is that it was right under a tightly constructed underpass that divides one community from another. After years of drivers still risking the odds to make their trip shorter, the underpass had been fitted with added precautions, cement blockades, and a metal gate that only opened for buses. This would increase our chances of making a clean getaway if the birthday boy and his pals sped towards us. Robert and I flinched to every distant sound, unaware of whether it was an ordinary motorist on their way home after a late evening, or the assailants we were so concerned with running into. We began to think that maybe we were overreacting. There was a good chance that someone had already phoned the police on them, and they had taken off to another area to avoid detection. Maybe they'd gone home, or better yet, gotten arrested. We let our guard slip as we reached our old junior high, starting to think that the worst case scenario we were preparing for was already behind us. That I was carrying a cumbersome piece of wood only looked like a jackass, that Robert was still armed with a firework and his Zippo for nothing. This is where I remember the set of walkways leading straight through the community towards an elementary school, which was right by the bus trap. I had walked it plenty of times before, and with the streetlights spaced out every 60 feet, we'd see them from a mile away, but they'd see us too. What we were greeted with instead were long expanses of burnt-out streetlight, another sparsely lit tunnel of shadows, and nightmares. We started down the path, because what other choice did we really have? Robert flicked his Zippo open as much as he could, still careful to conserve his lighter fluid in case of an actual confrontation. The walk didn't last long. The oversensitive backlight porches helped to fill in dark points, but there reached a point where it was getting too dark, where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and the accompanying sound of snapping twigs and branches was enough to signify that we might want to just get the hell out of there. We stood paralyzed for a moment, imagining the birthday boy and his friends waiting behind the shadow to pummel us. Though, sensing it had just been an animal, we returned to the quieter neighborhood areas. There may be more room for us to be seen, but less risk of getting cornered. We quickly made our way along unfamiliar streets and joined up with the final walkway to see it. The elementary school, and in the distance, the bus trap. We were so relieved to see safety in our sights, walking at a relaxed pace and feeling foolish for turning a 20-minute walk into an hour-long ordeal. We passed through the elementary school grounds and began walking the fully lit streets down the bus trap, when a black SUV came whipping around the corner on the left-hand side nearest the bus trap, balloons from the rear window streaking backwards from the velocity as the vehicle accelerated. There's no way they didn't see us. Crap! I shouted at Robert as we doubled back towards the elementary school and rounded the corner. We both had to think fast, as the road they were on was only a 15-second drive at the speed they were doing. We ran down the street along the elementary school, but found no cover. I heard the engine grow closer to us within seconds of turning into the street. We were out of time, and I pointed to the only cover I could find, a side yard fence. No accompanying front fence, no attaching hedge, nothing. Robert and I lied down on the grass against the fence, long like boards and stiff as corpses, our respective weapons at the ready. I have never felt my heart pump as hard as it was at that moment, tightly gripping the 2x4 while I watched Robert position the firework and unclap the Zippo. As if this was going to do anything, we really were chumps. The SUV slowed to a roll as it turned the corner, the headlights reaching down the road as they were searching for us. Convinced they wouldn't find us in the car, they parked. They parked at the edge of the property, right next to us. The headlights of the SUV were peeking out just beyond the fence. We were beyond screwed. 4 doors popped open, and within a few seconds, each to each other, feet kicking up gravel as the birthday gang murmured to one another and began to search for us. I noted at least 4 sets of footsteps and a couple of indistinct voices. We were definitely outnumbered. My mind flashed through all the numerous times I'd been pushed about at school, laughing good-naturedly as I refused to fight back in futility. I knew everyone who did this to me, and this humanized me to them enough that they never pushed it too far. These people didn't know me. They weren't aware of the bullshit persona I assumed. The odd guy who was alright with pain. They didn't know I pretended to think I was funny. These guys wanted to hurt me. They wanted to hurt me and my friend. This is it, I thought. This is the moment you quit being such a coward and you earn your own respect. I gripped the 2x4 tightly enough to dig tiny wooden splinters into my hand, and just listened to my heart thump as my blood boiled with whatever rage I could summon. I would only have a slim opportunity to surprise them before they'd take us down, and I hoped that Robert would get his firework off soon enough to buy us some time. If I was only getting in one strike, I was going to make sure it connected. As if some force miraculously knew what we were up against, I heard a voice say, "Screw it." A few seconds later, the car doors slammed shut. The SUV backed up, pulled a U-turn and drove off. All the courage I had to muster, everything I was prepared to fight with in a losing battle that I never knew my body had in me, and it all slowly settled back into the deepest regions of myself. Robert and I walked the quiet back route to the bus trap. We arrived at the underpass and casually walked through it. We both took a moment to look back into the other community that we had spent so much of our time in without issue, now in recognition of what we just had narrowly avoided. It felt like the type of thing a person should do. I wish I could say this near brush had some transformative effect on me, that it forced me to re-examine my passive tendencies and open up a new chapter in my life where I stopped letting myself be treated like everyone else's ragdoll. It didn't, not necessarily. My one takeaway from this experience was, despite my many previous assumptions about my fight or flight response, it proved that in a rare moment when I'm backed into a corner, I'll be prepared to stand my ground. Until then, birthday gang, let's not meet again. This happened a few months ago. I had just gotten Red Dead Redemption, and while I was playing online, I met this awesome guy named Rick. He's in his 50s, a retired firefighter, and we played together a while, helping me level up so that people wouldn't target a low-level player who is also a girl. After a while, he introduces me to this guy named Black Wolf Angel or something like that. He seemed pretty cool at first, this new guy. We would hang out on RDR, shoot lots of bandits, and do gang hideouts. After a while, we became somewhat good friends, and he then started to lightly flirt with me every once in a while. I let it slide, being the kind person I am, and I made it my goal to not get a so-called Xbox boyfriend, so I tended to avoid flirting on there. We would normally hang in parties or with Rick, but one time he invited me to a party and I'm like, oh okay, he and Rick want to play. But I was dead wrong. He began to flirt super heavily with me, and I acted like I had to go and I left. For weeks he would spam me with party invites and messages saying, "Hey sexy, I really want you." It finally got to the point where I was sick of him, so when he invited me the last time, I answered, and he started with the usual flirting, and I just said, "Look man, I'm not interested in any kind of relationship right now, so please lay it off." He agreed and stopped for a few days, but then he broke the silence by sending me a message saying, "I'm thinking of ending it all because of you." I flipped out on him and started to cuss him out and tell him to never contact me again. I told Rick about it all, and he told me he stopped talking to him a few days ago for the same reason. So for a while everything was cool, but then I started to get phone calls and text messages saying the same stuff he used to say. I answered one said call and told him to leave me alone or I'll get the police. Thankfully he stopped after that. So to the guy from Xbox Live, let's never meet again, you creep. In my first year of driving a semi, I was pretty naive to what happens in truck stops and rest areas, to say the least. Not knowing the world around me can have some pretty awful places. That being said, I took a load out to New York City heading to Savannah. With the hours I had left, I planned to stop for my break in Jessup. Arrived while the sun was still up, around 6:30 p.m, and didn't think much of my surroundings, so I went inside to eat. After eating, I went back outside to see literally 60 women wandering around everywhere. I had to guess they must have been between the ages of 18 to 75. I was propositioned at least 15 times on my way back to my truck, and it didn't stop there. All through the night, I had a lot of lot lizards knocking on my truck door. Worst place ever to take a break. I never stopped there any longer. These women all looked like they chose meth as a career in life. Jessup MDTA is a place of sadness and despair. I was 14 at the time, and had spent the night at my best friend's house, who was a year younger than me. We were pretty responsible, well-behaved kids, so we were trusted to be left home alone at times. That morning it was just 3 girls in the house, me, my friend, and her older sister, who was actually just about to leave for work. Parents were at work too. It was around 10 to 1 a.m, and I was laying in her bed, half awake, trying to fall back asleep. I'm a massively light sleeper, and her sister would always be the loudest in the morning when she got ready. And although me and her older sister, low-key, weren't that fond of each other, I never said anything. My friend Gabby and her sister Cheyenne. I could hear Cheyenne making her way out the front door, Gabby behind her to close and lock it after her. I heard Cheyenne say something along the lines of, "Make sure everything is locked," and how there's a weird man across the street sitting on the curb facing the house. She leaves. I got up because going back to sleep was not an option. I have had sleep issues for as long as I can remember, so I was sitting on her bed with pancakes, and we were just chilling eating our breakfast. This was about 10 minutes after Cheyenne had left, so me and Gabby were just chilling and talking, and I brought up how our sister said something about a guy across the street, and I said something along the lines of, "Your sister is so dramatic." I kid you not, there's knocking right on the door after I said that. Me and Gabby sat there looking at each other in silence. Her bedroom was located at the front of the home, so windows faced the street. I peeped through, but I didn't see a guy across the street. I creeped to the front door and I made a tiny peek to see who it was because her front door had this big old window with some shades. I didn't want whoever was there to see me. Long and behold, it was him, the guy Cheyenne warned us about. I knew because Gabby silently freaked out and was like, "Oh, it's him." We ran to the bathroom and called her sister. Gabby's house never really got visitors. I know this because I was always there. So there we are, locked in the bathroom, flipping out. Gabby said something like, "He's seen me after Cheyenne left. He knows I'm home alone." I was beyond scared, like, what if he somehow finds his way inside? We just knew he didn't have good intentions, so obviously now he knows there's a young girl in the house by herself. So her sister was on the freeway and wasn't able to return, so she told us to call their uncle who lives nearby. Her Uncle Mike rode a motorbike, who was really nice and tough looking. Me and Gabby are like sisters almost. So while we're waiting for Uncle Mike to show up, the stranger starts to frantically ring the doorbell. It got quiet for a little bit, and then he started to knock on the door really slowly. It was the creepiest thing ever. All her dogs outside are barking like crazy. Then before we know it, I heard her uncle's bike pull up. In relief, we left ourselves out the bathroom and run outside. So us 2 little girls thanked God that he made it quickly. The story isn't over though. When her uncle pulled up, he pointed him out. "Is that him down there?" Gabby lived across the street from an elementary school, which was only a few houses down. The dude was standing in front of it facing us, watching us. Whoever that weirdo was, I'm just glad I never saw him again. The following took place over the summer of 2016 at Wentworth Military Academy and College in Lexington, Missouri. I attended this school for their Camp LEAD program, a 3 to 5 week-long summer camp designed to introduce cadets to a military-style structure. When I arrived at the campus, one of the older cadets gave me a tour of the place, so I would know where everything was. The first building he showed me was Hickman Hall, the oldest building on the campus and rumored to be the most haunted. He showed me one of the windows on the building. There was a face drawn in dust. However, the interesting part about it is that the face is drawn in between the planes of glass. The school is located in the middle of the US, also known as Tornado Alley. Thus, windows need to be double or triple thick to ensure they don't break. The face showed up out of the blue around the turn of the millennium, and no one knows who drew it. Hickman Hall is home to numerous rumors and haunted stories. For example, in 1995, one night, around 3 a.m., every single door in the second floor flew open simultaneously. The doors inside are heavy-weighted doors that are designed to be hard to throw open. Another time, a cadet saw a floating Civil War-era general walking around and going into the closed rooms. The thought behind this is because the school is built on the grounds of the Battle of Lexington, a battle during the Civil War. Other times, cadets heard a particular door slam to then discover that it had been locked and hadn't opened in years. After a point, the cadets refused to live in the building, and the school built new barracks. They locked the door to Hickman Hall, and no one has been in or out for 15 years. I also had my own spiritual experience at the camp. One night, I was walking back to my room after I finished running on the track with my roommate and one other cadet. As we were walking about 100 yards away from Hickman Hall, we looked at the face to see a very bright white light emanating from that room. Our first obvious thought was that it was simply a street light shining through the building from the other side, as all the blinds and doors were open in the building. However, upon further investigation, we determined that could not have been it for two reasons. First was that the street lamps around the building were of a yellow nature, while this light was bright white. Second, and the more prominent reason, was that the light stayed in the middle of the room, even when we walked around at different angles. The building had no power, as why would it need to? And there were no lights that hung in the very center of the room. The other cadet that was with us had been attending the school for 3 years, so he knew the place inside and out. He never heard nor saw anything like that before, and we didn't see anything like that for the rest of camp. I have no idea what this light was, so I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Another building I was shown on my tour was the academic building. He told us a lot of rumors about the deaths related to that building, but none of them were confirmed except for one, around 1986. A cadet became very depressed and tragically ended his life in the basement of the building. He used a noose on one of the pipes in the ceiling, and at his feet, at his boots, were his journal. The journal was filled with demonic drawings, poems, and the like. Instead of filling the room up with concrete, the school simply locked the door and put the words, "The Dark Room," on the door. For years, cadets could hear whispers coming from the basement, and one day the imprint of a hand was found embedded in the wall on the stairs heading up. Now, some punk cadet could have done that in the night to mess with people, so I can't say 100% that it was supernatural in origin. At the end of our tour, my first roommate, of which I had two, came running out to say, "Hey, you won't believe what Luke just did." Shortly after Luke came running up, I explained to them why doing something like that is a bad idea. After a while, we all went inside and went into Luke's room. After a few minutes I left, and it was just Luke and Ashton, his roommate, in the room. The two of them were sitting up on their bunks and were talking about what just happened, when suddenly Ashton's chair moved a solid 2.5 feet, and his backpack, which was hanging on the back of the chair, fell to the floor. They came running out, screaming bloody murder. We went back to investigate and found all the windows and doors closed, along with the air conditioning being off when the chair moved. There was no way the wind moved that chair. It was also a reasonably heavy backpack. I can't recall how it came to happen, but I ended up looking under Luke's desk. Drawn on the underside of his desk drawer in permanent marker was a perfectly detailed Ouija board. Luke and Ashton started freaking out. We had the drawings removed, as the cader had a marker remover. For the rest of the night they were on edge and freaked out. One of the other cadets asked me if he could walk around with my Bible, to which I gladly obliged. A week later, I moved down to the other end of the hall, in the room of my second roommate, the one who was with me when I first saw the aforementioned light. One night, two older cadets decided to use a Ouija board they drew on the lid of a tub container. At first, nothing happened, so after a half hour they put it away and went to sleep. At 3 in the morning, they woke up to two very loud, very distinct knocks on their door. At first, they thought it was just night watch knocking. As it's a military camp, they have a member of the cadre walk up and down the halls around 2 in the morning with red lens lights. They simply walk up to the door and shine the light through the window in the door to make sure both cadets are still in bed, to make sure no cadets sneak out. As earlier in camp, 3 cadets snuck out and got extremely drunk and ended up being arrested. The red lens is to protect the eyes of the cadet and just a simple check. After a few seconds, the cadets realized the knocks did not come from the door to the hallway, but rather from their bathroom. The bathroom had no window nor any access to the outside aside from the door to the rest of the room. They were petrified as they opened up the door to find no one inside the bathroom, and their door to the hallway was locked. The first thought was that it was a mouse. However, mice don't make 2 distinct loud knocks on doors. These are just a few of the bizarre experiences I have found during my time at Wentworth Military Academy and College. Unfortunately, the school has since closed due to lack of funding, and I am no longer able to visit the campus. When Pokemon Go first came out, I couldn't keep up with my then girlfriend, now wife, at all. I'd spend hours walking around town, and somehow she'd always manage to outlevel me. So the only way I figured I'd get ahead would be to sacrifice my precious sleep and traverse and rough the tumbled streets of downtown Salt Lake City until the wee hours of the morning. And with that, my journey to become a true Pokemon master began. I started staying out until 1 or 2 in the morning 5 nights a week, since my work didn't start till around 10, and I felt I had enough time to recoup. And it worked great. Not only did I get ahead of her, but I developed a massive lead, made some friends, and even dropped about 12 pounds as well. It was working great, mostly. For anyone who doesn't know Salt Lake City, it has a pretty big problem with homeless people. A good number of them strung out on drugs or violently mentally ill. This isn't stereotyping, it's just a pretty well documented fact, both statistically and from my own experience. It's gotten somewhat better since the state stepped in to clean up downtown, but at the same time, they were filtering up into the nicer areas of the city at night and setting up camp or accosting people playing alone. As a result, I brought several knives which I would carry on me, one in my bag and one where most people hold a wallet, one in my pocket and yet another on my belt loop. I know it might have been overkill, but I wanted to be prepared for any situation. After all, I didn't need to win a fight, I just needed to make going after me not worth their time. And after getting sized up by a rather surly looking group when I had stopped to use a public bathroom by the state capitol, I decided it would be better to stock up than to be undergeared. Thankfully, I've never had to do anything with them, but I have had to brandish it on more than one occasion. One night I'm walking back from the hill leading up to the capitol, when I see a guy on the same sidewalk a ways off heading in the opposite direction. At first glance, he seems harmless, but then I see him start twitching his shoulders uncontrollably and realize he's probably tweaking right now. As he approaches, I can hear him talking to himself. Nothing intelligible, but I think I at least heard him say something about kangaroos are controlled by Interpol. I'd been focusing on listening to him and hadn't noticed that he'd realized I was there. He began to walk towards me with that sort of purposeful stride that you have when homing in on someone. He was still probably half a block away, and I needed to cross anyway, so I figured that were a good time as any to part company. As soon as I'd stepped away and put my feet into the road, he follows suit and picks up the pace, making a beeline right for me. I unfasten it from my belt loop and palm it just in case. He's still shambling towards me, and I realize I've got one last chance to get out of this without conflict. When he's no more than 10 feet away, I flick it out, casually brandishing it to my side, and there's just enough light on me to make out that I'm armed. The guy stops in his tracks and just walks back to his side of the road as I continue my walk to the throng of people gathered at a small park with 4 stops all lured up in the hope for a dragonite spawn. Sadly, that sort of dedication following such a creepy encounter didn't endear me to the gods of Pokemon Go enough to grant me one that entire summer. I freely admit that I could have been completely wrong about his intentions, but I wasn't willing to take the risk. Thankfully, I've never had another run-in like that again, even on subsequent nights when I went out binge playing until the deep freeze of winter arrived. I've had some really weird encounters with homeless people, including an overly aggressive panhandler who tried to come inside my apartment, and someone who thought walking in front of my car at a green light to keep me from going so he could beg for a ride to court, and I'm not joking with this, was good. But nothing where I actually felt my life was in danger like that night. In fact, my backcrap insane Stalker X scared me more than the homeless do. However, that's an entirely different story for another day. So, crazy guy, let's not meet again. Back in 2006, when I was 17, I met this girl called Cindy through mutual friends. We became really good friends and hung out often over the next few years. As the years went by, she started hanging out with the wrong crowd and acting gangster. By 2009, I had my own car, and the only time Cindy would call me to hang out is if I did her a favor first, which was a ride somewhere. Eventually, I got tired of this, and any time I would call her, she usually wouldn't answer. I got fed up and stopped being her friend. In 2011, after a while of not seeing each other, I forgot who contacted who, but we got together to hang out. As usual, she needs a favor first, a ride over to the next city to visit a friend. Forgetting all the times this happened in the past, I said yes, and this led to one of the most terrifying moments of my life. After picking her up at her house, she tells me last moment that a female friend is coming with us too. Me being an idiot, I pick her up too, and I'm all happy that I'm hanging out with 2 girls. We get on the highway, and despite asking numerous times where we were going and what we were doing, she wouldn't give me a straight answer. But I drive on as I'm happy to be hanging out with 2 girls. A while later we reach our destination, and it's a correctional facility. She came to visit a male friend, who we'll just call Suspect. After sitting alone in a lobby and questioning my life choices, they come back and we leave. I was pretty quiet on the drive home, and they didn't even ask me what was wrong. They happily chatted and left me out of the conversation. I dropped them both off and went home. A few days later, Cindy calls me and asks me to hang out again, telling me it will just be her this time. I say yes, and we set up a meeting for the following day. Then something important came up, and I called Cindy to let her know that I wouldn't be able to see her then. She didn't like this, got angry, and hung up. A few hours later, when I was home, she messages me and tells me not to blame her if guys come looking for me. A short while later, I get a call from the correctional facility, and being stupid, I answer it. A gangster-sounding guy addresses me by name, insults me a bit, tells me that I'm about to get lit up. Cindy then messages me saying that there are guys in my neighborhood looking for me, and this is terrifying because I was out in front of my house working on my car. I try calling her and she doesn't answer. She texts me again letting me know they're close, and I immediately try to call her again to no reply. She texts me and says the only way she can stop them is to pick her up and drive her to the correctional facility. Being terrified and fearing for my life, I oblige. This time she brings another female friend, Melanie, who I know, and we head over to the correctional facility as they blare their music in my car and act like nothing happened. After they visit the inmate, they proceed to drink in my car, despite me telling them not to. They blare out more of their music and eventually spill an entire bag of chips and crush it into the carpet. I ask them to clean it up as they're getting out of the car, but they just walk away without a word. I dump all the garbage and chips out my car onto the street in front of her house and find my iPod on the floor, oily and mixed in with everything. Feeling terrified and disrespected, I block Cindy and her friend's number so they can never contact me again. Later on, through mutual friends, I learned that Cindy and Melanie gave the suspect my name and address and set up the whole thing. I moved in with my dad around the age of 11, and to help keep in contact with my brother, my dad helped me create an Xbox Live account. I made plenty of friends on Halo 3, Left 4 and Dead 2, and Resident Evil 5, and I had an amazing group of people that I am still friends with to this day. The group I made were much older than me with a few exceptions. Some of their kids were also friends, a part of this group, and one of them is actually a day older than me, so he and I became rather close. Overall, I made a lot of amazing memories with these people, but there was one problem. About a year or two into being involved with these people, a random person randomly rejoins the group. The person was a friend with one of them before, and the others were acquainted as well, but they barely knew them. I've never been great at making friends as I'm quite awkward and say a lot of weird things that makes people cringe in desperation, but I am nice and friendly. I added this mysterious person, but I was rather distant as they didn't have a mic, and this person was also pretending to be a woman. When Halo Reach came out, every single one of us was on that game. We practically dominated SWAT, and this person would join in often. Communication was obviously limited because they lacked a mic, but it made it easier for them to pretend to be female. Now I do have a fairly deep voice myself, so a lot of people even now still think I'm a boy when I'm playing online. So my instant thought was that maybe this person was just self-conscious over how they sounded and just couldn't afford a mic perhaps. One morning, this person and I are both online. Everyone else was either still sleeping or at work, and it was a weekday. This person and I began messaging each other back and forth. It was pleasant conversation at first, which then turned dark. Mind you, this person was well aware that I was young and inexperienced in life. They began sending me sexually explicit messages, asking them to show me my 13-year-old breasts. At that moment I blocked the person. My buddy, who introduced me to the group and is well into his 30s, gets online and I tell him everything. It's obviously a little odd for such a young person to be friends with several people a few decades older than themselves, but they all treated me like a little sister, and this became evident when I told my friends what happened. He immediately got defensive and starts messaging the mysterious man that was no longer allowed to join our group, as what he did was disgusting. As everyone in our group began signing on and joining the conversation, we put the pieces together and realized that number 1, this person was a creep, 2, a liar, and 3, a man. They lied about not having a mic, and was caught with a mic at a few points during their time with the group. The person speaking was apparently male, and then lied about it, saying that the person speaking was her brother. There was plenty of other proof people offered up, but that one was one of the main ones I remember. This happened at the last house my mother's sister and I were renting in. The house had changed hands every year or so, and it belonged to a renting company rather than a regular landlord, so we didn't have any information about the previous residents of the place, but it was in a decent neighborhood, so we didn't think it necessary to check. About 8 months after moving in, last January, I was playing video games in the office on a Saturday night, at around midnight or so, when I was startled by an aggressively loud banging on the front door. The rapping was so hard it sounded like the door would fly off at its hinges, and it echoed through the entire house, loud enough that my mother could hear it in her room with the door closed and with music on. Now, we all know that it's never a good thing when someone bangs on your door that hard in the middle of the night, but that didn't stop my mother from racing downstairs and beating me to the door to see what the hell was happening, and answered it by pulling the blinds from the windows next to the door, revealing a man who looked to be in his mid-20s standing very close to it. When she asked him what was going on, he replied he was looking for someone named Jamal. Nobody knew a guy with that name, so she told them nobody was there. The guy kept persisting, and my mother continued to insist that the person they were looking for didn't live here. After a few minutes, my mother would later tell me that there was another guy who appeared from the left coming around from the side of the house, where some windows were, and it became very clear he was checking for Jamal, in case my mother was lying or something. Thankfully, they eventually left. The next morning, I took out our car to drive to work, and noticed it wasn't driving right, as I was sliding all around the lane. I didn't pay it too much mind, however, because it snowed a few days prior and there was still ice on the road in some places, so I assumed there was a lot of black ice. It wasn't until someone in the parking lot of the store I worked at flagged me down and told me 2 of my tires were losing air and flatting out. I carefully drove back home and told my mother what happened with the tires, and it finally clicked. The angry knocking at midnight, the aggressive demanding for a guy we didn't know, the guy scouting around the side of the house, likely looking in windows. They slashed all our tires, which meant they were likely armed. The thought of them not believing us and breaking in still haunts me to this day, because we wouldn't have had a way to fight back if they chose to keep looking. It's the first time I've ever felt completely helpless. A few weeks later, we got a package for someone who was a previous tenant, and a guy came looking for it, after assuming it was delivered to their old residence. Turns out, the guy was Jamal's older brother. We told him what happened, and he seemed completely blindsided by the information, as if that was the first time he'd learnt that his little brother may be involved in the wrong crowd. I don't know what happened afterwards, but hopefully the revelation led to Jamal getting help. We also got some free tires out the deal, so it wasn't a total loss, but I'd rather not see those 2 guys ever again, especially in the middle of the night. Early into college, I took a class that required a team project. I didn't know anyone in the class or the area, so I was paired by the professor with a guy called Frank. Frank seemed quiet and mellow, like me, so I thought it would go smoothly. Before leaving class, we exchanged numbers and swapped ideas for the paper we had to write together. The project itself ran smoothly. We never got together outside of class to work on it, but completed it with Google Docs and occasional texts and got a high grade. I thought that would be the end of our acquaintanceship, but I was wrong. He asked me out over text and I politely told him I was flattered but not interested. Apparently that wasn't a good enough hint because he kept texting me. He would ask me out on dates or to come over to my dorm if I would tell him which one it was. At this point I was creeped out and annoyed, so I stopped answering him. The next few days he texted me. Frank would compliment my outfit that day, when I hadn't seen him the whole day. But apparently he had seen me. I felt like I was being watched everywhere on campus. He said, "That green color looks good on you. Your hair's pretty today." A few more weeks passed and he started to get angry. He would text me asking me where I was and why I didn't show up for a date, things I never agreed to. I still hadn't texted him back this whole time. He'd say things like, "Looking forward to pizza with you tonight. Catch you at the movies at 7. I definitely should have blocked him by then. He followed me on my Instagram at the time, and I'd posted a picture of my cat, who had unexpectedly passed away, along with a caption of talking about how much I missed him. He liked the photo, then sent me a 2-word text, meow meow. I finally blocked Frank on everything. Phone, social media, the whole thing. He would friend request me once from what must have been a second account, but I quickly blocked it too. Over the next years of college, I would occasionally see him on campus. He'd keep his head down around me, but he always made me nervous after that. I'd rather not meet him again. I'm a mail carrier. I know, super interesting, right? Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird stuff that happens to us. I've had people follow me while I'm delivering and trying to get into my delivery vehicle to steal stuff. I've had a customer vomit on my car after she opened a parcel her husband sent her that was meant to go to his mistress. I have delivered adult toys that fell out of their flimsy packaging, and I have seen people doing it near my more secluded routes, and they didn't stop for me. This is the kind of stuff that typically happens to us contract carriers. For those who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who buy a contract for a mail route that is typically in a rural area, from what I understand. The fancy mail jeeps cannot traverse them, so we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we are paid on a monthly basis depending on the type of route, how long the route takes, and the day-to-day stuff, and what the post office deems as fair. Technically, we're self-employed, but we still have to abide by the rules of the post office, and we have to become certified to even touch the mail. But of course, being in the areas that we are in most of the time, that kind of weird stuff I mentioned happens all the time. Those things happened to me when I was a sub, someone who works for a contract holder but does not own the route in any way. I was paid by the person who owns the route out of their own pocket. Now, however, I am the somewhat disgruntled owner of a 10-year route contract for the first time. I've owned the contract for about 7 months. It's a pretty easy gig. The route itself only takes about 2.5 hours to case, sort the mail for delivery, and another good 3 to 4 hours to deliver on a good day, 5 to 6 on super heavy days. I'm not looking forward to how the holidays fare on this route. Thing is, before I got the contract, I had no idea what I was bidding on. The way someone gets a contract is that they bid for it. The person bidding will give a month's salary amount that they feel would be fairish for the route in question. The post office and bid holders then decide which amount is the most accurate, in their oh-so-wise opinion, for the route, and they give it to whoever has that amount. I was lucky enough to get it, so I get a pretty damn good pay that I technically chose for myself. All I know of the routes was that it went down into the valley. I live in a very small desert city, with some very wide outlying mini communities. These outlying areas are where the majority of our office contract routes deliver to. My route goes 25 miles out of town to a lot of small ranch properties in the closer areas, and some pretty scattered random loner properties in the farthest areas. There are a lot of hills, and the dirt roads where I go to, it's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know where you're going. There's one area in particular that goes through a small forest, nestled between a random outcropping of hills heading out onto the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything. That's just the closest definition I can give. There's not really trees so much as gigantic bushes that nestle together very closely on either side of the road, that is towards the end of the route, but it takes up a good chunk of my customers' addresses. When I was training, the previous owner of the route, called Jim, gave me a rundown of the people who live on the route. There are a lot of ranch owners, of course, and they are the ones who get the most parcels. This isn't surprising to me, since they're the richest people out there. We, of course, call that section the ranches. There are the elderly retirees that live at a tiny retirement community, set up by the city out there. It's pretty spread out, like a teeny tiny town of their own. That's the area with the second most amount of parcels, lots of random buying, and sometimes gifts from relatives. We call that area the retirement homes. These are the customers I speak to the most. There's the outskirters, as Jim called them. There are the people who live so far off the grid that most of the time we don't deliver packages to them. As a general rule, we are not allowed to deliver boxes to our house if it is more than 3 miles away from the mailbox. Most of them live about 5 or 6 miles from the boxes, and their boxes are in a long line, or clusters as we call them, on the side of the road. As a courtesy to these customers, I ask them to give me their phone number so I can call them if they have a parcel and they can meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm grateful for them, because a lot of these roads are treacherous. I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them, and got stuck, unable to move my car for almost 4 hours as I lost service. Eventually they found me, and that's when they gave me their number at last. They don't get many boxes though in that part of the route. And then is what Jim called the ghost town. It's not really a town per se, but more of the secluded homes like the previous area. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the ones who live in the forest I mentioned before. He called it the ghost town for good reason. These people are either never home, as most of them are snowbirds, or the ones who are very creepy. There are a few homes out there that are usually vacant, that have a lot going on. For the stories I'm about to tell you, there are 3 homes involved. 2 of them are in the ghost town. The other one takes place in the outskirts area, and that last one is the worst. There's more, honestly, but these are by far the more interesting as far as history and the stuff that's happened. Number 1. The Bailey Cluster. The Bailey Cluster is a group of homes in the ghost town that belongs to a single family with the name Bailey. Their mailboxes are all nestled together on the same side of the road against some of those large bushes in the forest. Just before the mailboxes, there are 4 total. It's a small dirt road that leads up to their property. The whole road has to be about 4 feet across. That's how it feels when you're driving up, because the bushes on either side will scrape the sides of my car. I've gotten more than a few scratches because of them. I've asked them to trim down the bushes, but they never do, so I just gave up. When you get to the property, you're met with a large 6-foot-tall rusted iron gate with the name Bailey fashioned out of bent horseshoes and pipes welded to the top. As a general rule, if the gate is shut, we are never encouraged to try and open it to drive in. We aren't really supposed to walk in if it's shut either, unless the customer has told us it's okay. For the Baileys, I get out and walk their parcels through the gate and up to the first house, which isn't far from the gate. I have to state now, I have never once met these people in person. I've spoken to them on the phone, and I've been on their property, but I have never once seen hide nor hair of them. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is split up, as if their homes are in like a trailer park. For example, one of them gets their mail at 111 Ghost Town Road Mobile 1, Little Desert Town, la 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 la, and the other person number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. Every time I bring the parcel, I just leave it at the first house. Once you walk through their gate, you have to walk uphill a bit, and you can see the teal-green roof of the first house peeking up over the hill as you walk. And when you get closer, it becomes apparent why the place is so unsettling. Clowns. These people love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, wind chimes. You name it, it has a clown on it. They even have clown dolls scattered around the place. None of them look nice. They're all threadbare and worn out for sitting in the hot desert sun all day. I'm pretty sure animals have made homes in some of them. There are a few that are big enough to house a small family of squirrels. Now I know that this isn't bizarre yet, and I'm getting there, I promise, but you have to admit that this is more than a little odd. The first house is a simple single-wide mobile with a bright teal-green painted roof. The windows all have clown decals in them, little clown faces that look like they're straight out of a vintage coloring book, hand-colored and everything. At one end of the place is the porch, not too big, and it juts out about 6 or 7 feet. There are small awnings with dozens of clowns, wind chimes, and sun catchers hanging from it, almost making a curtain out of them so they're clustered together. On the porch is a rocking chair. This thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red. The legs that attach them to the chair are yellow with red polka dots. Their seat and arms are white, and the back is white, with 3 big red dots painted on it like puffballs on a clown shirt. The top part of the back has a clown face on it. Put it all together, and it's a nightmare. This chair is where I'm asked to leave the parcels, and I do, but I'll never forget the first time I left them there. There were 4 boxes for them, number 1 and the rest for number 3. I called ahead of time to let them know I'd take them there and I'd be there in about 3 hours, since they're towards the end of the route. It takes longer to get to them, and I'm always told by who I assume is their matriarch to leave them on that chair. I'd never been up to their property at this point. I'd been delivering about a month, but only ever had mail and small parcels that fit in the box for them. So when I went up there for the first time, seeing their little clown cluster was a bit nerve-wracking to say the least, as I am terrified of clowns and have been since I was a child. But that's a story for another time. I crept up to that first house and peered around the place. It was so isolated and odd. I felt like every single clown around me was watching me. I placed the boxes on the chairs in a neat little pile and settled on the chairs to stop it from rocking so the boxes wouldn't fall off. Once it was still, I turned and hastily tried to leave. It was the creaking that stopped me. I froze and listened, knowing full well what it was. I turned, and sure as hell that chair was rocking, and not just a little, but enough to knock one of the boxes on the porch. It was like someone had deliberately pulled it all the way back and thrust it forwards to the rocks as violently as possible. I didn't hesitate. I just ran and noped the hell out of there. I'm not staying after that. Another time I had a parcel for them, and I almost wrote it up out of protest, but I called again and was asked to leave it on the chair. This is the time I noticed that it felt like no one was there. I'd been there a dozen times by that point, and I remember standing on the top of the hill by the gate just peering around me like, where is everyone? According to their mail, there are at least a few children that live there, and when I was there that day it was the middle of summer. Why weren't the kids home playing outside? Why didn't I ever see anyone? The second and third house are a bit far away from the first house. It'd be about a 5-minute walk I think to get to them, but you can see them pretty well. Curtains always open, but I never see anyone inside. The fourth house is the furthest away at the top hill. They have built a big picture window facing the gate. It too always has the curtains open, but I've never seen anyone there. Weirdest of all, their vehicles are always there. They never move. They are 2 old trucks, an SUV relatively newish, and an old station wagon. The wagon looks run down, but the others look like they're taken care of and always clean. This other time I had a parcel and noticed no one was ever around. I got curious and phoned the woman. I always do when bringing parcels. I figured I'd just tell her I was making sure someone would be back soon to get the parcel, as there is a lot of theft out there. There usually is on more secluded routes. You'd be surprised how much more common it is out there than in the city. I heard a phone ringing in the house beside me. If I'm on the porch, I can peek into the window just behind the evil rocking chair. It was close, the phone that was ringing, and I wanted to see someone pick it up. I squeezed myself behind the chair and looked in. I'd never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and some clown-themed froze on the couch, and pillows too. On a side table, clearly visible from the window, I could see the cell phone lit up with "Mail Lady" as the caller ID. No one answered, but when I left, she called me back. She'd gone about 5 minutes when she did. I just told her I wanted to be sure someone was home, and she said, "Someone is always here." According to Jim, he never saw anyone there either. The third and final most interesting thing to ever happen at the Bailey cluster was just last month. I got a very large box for them, one I needed a dolly for. I called before I even left the post office to let them know, and the lady I always spoke to told me she would have her oldest son help me. I thought, finally, I get to meet one of them. This ought to be good, right? I get there, it's my last package, and then I was free to breeze through the final 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of 670 boxes on my route. I go to the back, pull out the dolly, slide the box out onto it, and start dragging it up the gate. I look around. No one met me, of course. The lady told me he'd be waiting for me on the porch of the first house, and when he saw me, he'd come down to help. You can see the gate from the porch pretty well, but I could never really see my car from it, so I honked just in case he couldn't see me either. No one came down. I waited for about 5 minutes before saying, "Screw it, I'm taking it up." I struggled up the hill with it. I didn't know what was in the box, but I'm pretty sure it weighed about 75 pounds. The post office have a 70-pound weight limit that a lot of companies try to stretch to 75 or 80. Usually they'd go to UPS, but sometimes they'd slip through the cracks and come by us. I get to the first house, and of course no one's there. I look around, and as usual I'm all alone with a bunch of clown dolls gaping at me. I wiggle the box up the chairs on the dolly and lean it against the railing next to the rocking chair. It's way too big to sit it on, and I head down to my car. That's when I hear a "thank you" from behind me. It's a man's voice. I quickly run back up the hill, and not only is there no one there, but the box is gone from the porch. This was in the span of 10 seconds. I wasn't even down the hill all the way. It doesn't take that long to walk back down. I look in the window, and everywhere, not seeing a soul. I hate going to the Bailey cluster, and I end up going there a lot. Number 2. The Blood House. This place is the one that gives me the most creeps. While I was training, Jim told me about this place. This is another snowbird place where the people only live there between October and March. They were there when I started, and they came back the beginning of this month. Super nice couple. I really like them, but not a clue why they live here. Jim told me that back in the early 90s when he first started working at the post office, the guy who used to do the routes before him told him the story. According to him, there was a family of 5 that lived there. All of them were absolutely crazy. The mum had schizophrenia and would apparently abuse the kids because of voices. The father was no better. He was a worthless drunk who just sat by while his wife hurt the kids. One night, the eldest child of 18 was fed up with how they were raised and tried to escape with his siblings. The mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the kid finally snapped. He killed his parents and painted the walls with their blood. The incident changed him, and while his siblings escaped, he stayed in the house with his parents' corpses until he ended up cutting his own throat and tried painting the floor in his blood before succumbing to his blood loss and perishing himself. They weren't found for months. The place was cleared out and torn down and rebuilt, and the guy who built the new house was compelled to paint the house red. It's not obnoxious red, but it's too red, if that makes sense. There's no long driveway up to this place. It sits right on the end of the road at the end of the ghost town. The end is literally a dead-end road, and they're right there at the tail end of where the sign tells you to turn around. The current owners, let's just call them Mr. and Mrs. Nice, because they're nice, and I'm not that creative, have told me countless horror stories about living there. Sometimes, I think that they get some sort of sick thrill out of it. When they're not there, I forward everything, but I always have to pass their house to get to the turnaround spot, and their neighbors always have mail, so I have to go by there no matter what. I've seen some really weird stuff there, but every time I pass the blood house, I just get this awful feeling of dread. Whenever I did deliver packages to them, I'd step out of the car and just stand at the edge of the driveway. It feels like standing at the precipice of a cliff. It feels like stepping onto their property. It's like jumping to my doom. It's terribly unsettling. I honestly don't know how they stay there for as long as they do. I mean, they leave for 6 months out the year, so I guess for them it might not be too bad. But if I feel that way just delivering packages once in a while, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Mrs. Nice told me to always watch the third row window from the left, because that's where the son went mad, and where he likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, despite the fact it's not his real name, but she feels like it suits him. She talks about him like he's her own son. I think she pities him. She believes that his soul is trapped because of all the terrible things he did. When she first told me, my reaction was, no thanks. But one day the temptation got the best of me, and I looked. When you're at their mailbox, you can see into all their windows. The house is long, one-story place with 6 windows, 3 on either side of the small front door. Of course, the house is red with the trim and the door all white. The window in question is the one that sits right next to the front door on the left. So I looked in and couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't see a full-bodied apparition or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face, and it looked so anguished, like the happy and sad mask you see for drama and theatre. It looked like the sad mask, just pinned. I blinked, and the face was suddenly gone, and the curtain, which had been open, was closed. On another occasion, I walked up to the house to put a package by the door. The nice couple weren't home that day. Their truck was gone, so I decided to put the package around the back and leave a note in their box to let them know, since I didn't have a number for them at the time. When I walked around the back, I put the package over the small fence into the backyard. Once I did, I turned and felt myself run into someone, but there wasn't anything in front of me. Nothing but air. But I swear I felt someone was in front of me. I didn't want to move forward. It was like an invisible wall had erected before me, and while I couldn't see it, I knew that if I went any further, I'd get hurt. I just felt oppressive and strange. I actually backed up into the house and slid along the wall all the way to the front, and whatever invisible force was there, I felt like it followed me. I actually began to weep, because I felt like there was a person just pressing up against me as I moved, like they were trying to force me back. Once I hit the edge of the house, I ran. I ran to the car and sped away, crying most of the way back, because it was so terrifying. When I told Mrs. Nice about it next time I saw her, she said Tommy likes to do that. He tries to intimidate people, and he does it to Mr. Nice all the time, apparently. Around the 3rd week after the Nices left for their summer home, I passed the house and swore I saw someone standing at the mailbox. But it wasn't solid. It was like a blurred outline of a person, and when I got closer, as I passed, the head seemed to turn with me as I drove, watching me. I do not like passing the house. I'm glad they're back for the winter. It makes me feel a bit more at ease to know they're there. But I still don't like the idea of delivering packages to them, as I don't want to be anywhere near Tommy. And of course I have saved the worst house for last. The Hills Have Eyes house. I hate this house. This is the one that isn't in the ghost town. This is in the section before it, the outskirts. These are the homes that are so scattered we usually won't bring parcels to them because they're so far away. But this house gets an exception because it's less than a mile from the cluster of boxes they get their mail at. These people are never home. Jim told me that apparently they're very rude and hostile. He instructed me to just go to their gate, and if they have a parcel, always bring the mail with it, or they will call and complain. Leave the parcel in the basket that hangs in their fence with their mail in a rubber band, and leave. He said to never linger there. He told me that if I did, they got hostile. I do as I'm told, but thankfully they've almost never been home. But something is. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of the place itself, just that these people are apparently the world's biggest pricks. 2 men live there, brothers from what Jim told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the feed store in town to sell all the time. It's not uncommon to see their chickens roaming around the roads leading up to the house. The road itself is barely a road. It's more like a bumpy little walking trail, but it's the only way to get there. And I know I've said already, but God, I hate going there. I call it the Hills Have Eyes house, because it's settled between 2 large hills and far, far away. The hills look like eyes, and the house looks like its mouth. That, and the way the place looks. It looks like something out of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. There's butchering equipment everywhere, bloody knives and cleavers and chains and hooks. They've got cows too, but I think they keep the meat for themselves. The smell is just atrocious. It always smells like death. To be honest, it wouldn't shock me if these guys committed murder out there and only butchered cows when they did to make excuses for the stench of death. Every single time I go there, something happens. I've been out there 6 times to deliver parcels, so I will recount each incident. The first time was around 3 months after I started delivering. I did as I was told, wrapped the mail in a rubber band and headed out to the house. Takes a good 3 or 4 minutes. It's around a bend, and then that's when you see the 2 other hills that the house sits between. The main house has a fence around it with a gate, but the whole property has an outer fence with no gate that I go through. Once you're up against the gate, the whole place looks a lot smaller than it is because it's full of junk. All the butchering stuff, random metal sculptures, a bunch of worn-out furniture, garbage, a few cow skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is just a small trailer that's been cemented onto the ground, so it's no longer mobile. A makeshift ramp/porch that sits against the door and leads to the gate. This is where the basket for packages is. All around this gated area are coops and other fenced areas for the animals. It's smelly and weird and creepy around there. I just tossed the box and mail into the basket and turned to leave. I didn't want to stay at all. When I got to my car, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a man standing behind my car. But when I poked my head out to ask him to move, there was no one there. Of course, I didn't want to stay another second. The second incident was closer to the evening. It was another super heavy day and I did not want to go out there. As I was approaching, I saw someone standing at the window of the house. I assumed it was one of them trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS on them, so people know who I am, and I figured he'd seen them and be more at ease knowing a package was coming and not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window distorted and eventually vanished entirely. I did not want to get out of the car. I just wanted to stay there and toss the parcel and mail out the window. After working up the courage, I sped from the car to the basket, and as I went to leave, I was getting right to my car when I heard this loud, raucous laughter. It sounded like it was right next to my car, like someone was standing beside me. I prayed I wouldn't have to return in a while. 2 months later, I had to go back with 4 big boxes for them. This time it was a pretty light day. I was breezing through delivering packages very quickly, so I was happy about that. They're about in the middle of the route, so they're like a halfway point for me. I went to the house and was greeted by a large bull in the yard. I'm not usually nervous around animals, but a bull isn't something you want to mess around with. He was standing just a few feet from the fence with the basket, so I just patiently waited to see if he would move. I didn't want to honk, lest the angry beast who lived in there happened to be home and come out and yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoo him because honestly I didn't think it would work. All of a sudden, this bull goes crazy, freaks the hell out, thrashing about as if someone were riding him, and came dangerously close to my car before running off into the area where the fences were. Then a whole chorus of moos erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of noise. I grabbed the boxes, got them to the fence as fast as I could, as I didn't know what spooked the bull, and I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid the bull would be coming back and tearing up my car, or even goring me in the process. The fourth incident is honestly not the worst, but unsettling nonetheless. I had never had a package so small that it fit in the box for them. Honestly, I almost said screw it and shoved it in the mailbox. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They hadn't on me thus far, and I wanted to keep it that way, so I reluctantly headed to the house with the package in their mail. When I got there, a single dead chicken was hanging from the awning above the porch. Weird, but honestly not surprising. Not as surprising as the giant dressed cow hanging from the pole on the other side of the yard. I didn't notice that until I was putting the package in the basket. It was obscured by a tree when driving up the place, and as I'm walking back to the car, the chicken and the cow both suddenly start to swing. It's not windy, and even if it was, one of these things is a cow. I don't think a light breeze is going to push it. They're swinging back and forth almost in tandem, and I just went nope and left. I wasn't going to stay for the rest of the show. The fifth time was 2 weeks ago. It had been quite a while since I went out there, and I had vainly hoped that I wouldn't have to go back for long. But oh well. The holidays are starting. Everyone is getting stuff. I get out there with 3 boxes, and for the first time I see a living, breathing person in the window. Jim told me one of the brothers was in a wheelchair. This was that brother. He was bald with a weird tribal tattoo across where I believe his hairline used to be. He was sitting in the window staring at me. I waved out of courtesy, and of course he didn't wave back. First time either of us had ever laid eyes on one another, but I didn't know what I expected him to do. Smile back and wave? When I know damn well these guys are dicks. I noticed, as I put the parcel in the basket, that he wasn't looking at me, but something behind me. I looked and saw someone walk behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at the brother in the window, and he gave me a grumpy sort of, "You saw that, right?" kind of look, and nodded towards the coop. I just slowly nodded and went back to the car. He watched me back out, and as I was turning back onto the road, I saw him leave the window and draw the curtain closed. The last time was yesterday. I was having a typical holiday season Monday. Very heavy day with lots of mail and lots of parcels. And of course, they had to have a whopping 5 parcels. I get out there about 4 p.m. and I'm already exhausted, halfway done, knowing that I'm not going to finish until around 7. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office and another 10 to unload and finish my day. I know I won't finish the route until about 6, so I'm trying to hurry, and getting out to this place doesn't help making it in good time. So I get out there, get out, put some of the boxes in the basket and the others below the gate to leave. Suddenly, I feel a hard tug on my shirt that pulls me backwards, and I fall on my ass in the dirt. I hit my head on the edge of the trailer and swear to myself before getting up. I thought maybe I had my shirt caught on something, but as I get further away I feel another hard tug and fall back again. This time I know I didn't catch on anything, because I was about 2 feet from the fence on my left and there was nothing on my right and nothing directly behind me. I scramble up and try to run as I pull hard, and I feel another tug and I hear that god-awful laugh again. I didn't look back. I left. I still talk to Jim every now and then. When I tell him about these incidents, he goes, "Oh yeah, that place is haunted. More so than some of the others, I think." In Jim's opinion, the whole route is damned. There are, as I said, other places out there where weird stuff happens, but these are the ones I find the freakiest. After yesterday's little incident at the Hills Have Eyes house, I felt like I wanted to share these stories with someone other than my husband. Either way, I'm in a contract now, so if this is the best of the last 7 months, I'm sure I'll have way more stories over the next 10 years to come. My cousin was a drummer in the 60s. He toured the world for many years. When he retired, he brought his own tour bus and drove bands all over the USA. When bands were in the area, the stars stayed in a hotel, but the band would stay with me. This was when bands toured an area for 4 or 5 days. I was 16 and a good cook and a great baker thanks to my grandma. When the bands would arrive, I would have a layout of my specialty 3-day lasagna, bean dip and chips, hamburger pie, my famous peanut butter fudge and peanut butter cookies, and a lot more. Enough to feed an army, my mother would always say. When my favorite band would arrive, we would go hang out with the band and my cousin at the venue, and sometimes watch the show. This one time we were hanging out with the band in front of the club they were playing at. The star stayed at the back of the bus. My mother, father, sister and cousin were talking near the back of the bus. The band members and I were hanging out near the front of the bus out of sight of my parents, and I was sitting on the hood of our car with my legs crossed, wearing a casual skirt or halter top. The 5 band members were near me, with only one, my crush, next to me about 10 feet away. He was smoking, and I really didn't want to breathe that stuff in. Some man was kind of drunk, walked over to where I was sitting. The guys thought I knew him, but I certainly didn't, and pushed me back onto the hood of the car, pulled my skirt up, and was trying to pull my halter top off. He was so fast, he was like an octopus. In no time, the 5 band members had him on the ground while my crush adjusted my clothes and held me in his arms while I stood sobbing. My parents, my sister and my cousin came running when they heard the commotion and saw me sobbing in my crush's arms and the drunk man on the ground. The police were called and arrived in 3 minutes, and I had to tell them everything the man did, which left me sobbing more. He was taken to jail and I don't know what happened to him, but the fact that these band members jumped into action to defend my honor was appreciated very much. They came out a few more times and said they would take me on the road with them when I turned 18. The week before my 18th birthday, my cousin passed away from a sudden heart attack from all the drugs he used in the 60s with his own band. I was beyond crushed and spent a week in my room crying. So many of the guys I met called to say how sorry they were. A few of the stars also took the time to call, and even my crush called several times. So to all the band members who were wonderful to me and my family, thank you. To the drunk guy who tried to assault and do something worse to a 16-year-old girl, let's never meet again. My family is from Hungary. We are currently residing in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Here crime is crazy high. I remember that Mike Pondsmith once called Rio the most cyberpunk city in the world because he read about these cases where police were fighting some cartel that used rocket launchers against them. I live in a pretty expensive neighborhood, but I can hear someone shooting, be it pistols, revolver or rifle, every day. I've been in a war before, and here it's very similar. The police climb up the slums and leave the perished ones on the streets. The cartels burn people alive and so on. That's pretty much a lightweight situation in the city. There are many more aspects which I could touch that aren't pertinent to our story. Even though we dress fairly simply, speak Portuguese with no accent, and don't go walking around, one look at me or my father and you know we're foreigners. So there was this one time, he was driving a company car alone, going to the docks to take a look at some containers with equipment that the company shipped to Brazil because of some big negotiation. When I say father dressed simply, I mean really simply. A short-sleeved shirt, linen pants and shoes, and an old watch that belonged to my grandfather. And that's it. No fancy suits or anything when it wasn't strictly necessary. It just so happened he was driving in a dangerous area. Too many trees and all. He fell for the oldest trick in the book. A boy of 12 or 13 in the middle of the street lying down. No space to turn, so he stopped. That's when 5 thugs came out of the bushes with guns. I sincerely doubt it was a real pistol the way he described them. They looked more like greenhorns in the business than anything else. Everyone was nervous when they came into the car. They looked into the glove compartment and found nothing, and told my father to drive to the bank. They all entered the bank with my father, and made him empty something like €1,000, which is money considering we aren't rich. No idea why the guards didn't do anything, but thinking better, perhaps it was for the best. If that pistol really was a pistol, that would have turned into a standoff with the police, and a hostage situation in Rio usually turns into showdowns. They made him drive to a slum and took the car. Father was lucky, unscathed, other than a bruise that the gun dude made by whipping his head. Moral of the story? Father went to the police and explained the situation. Police have some kind of veneration for foreigners, and he was wounded. The bank refunded the money, and from the 6, as far as I know, they didn't enjoy it for very long. Police got 4 of them, including Pistol Dude and the boy, as they weren't able to scrap the car for parts. They had to burn it. 1 was wounded and apprehended, but passed away like the other 4. He was a minor, as were 2 others of the fallen. Another regular day in Rio, sadly. This happened when I was young. My best friend and I were both obsessed with Pokemon Gold and Silver. We would spend our weekends at each other's houses battling and trading all day until we were called home or got mad at each other after a particularly rage-filled battle. Our neighborhood was pretty small, and the 2 streets connecting our houses created an L shape, with her house at the top corner of the L and mine at the bottom right. Her street led downhill to my street, and my street was flat. This will come back to play later. It was a mobile park home, and at the time it was safe for kids to walk through the neighborhood alone. But since then it's gotten bad. This particular afternoon, I was walking back to my house with my pink Game Boy Color and link cable in hand, probably really stoked to get back home and continue playing. I didn't even notice a man crossing the street and walking quickly in my direction. Thinking back, this guy was probably in his late/early 20s. And at the time, though being a little girl who was small for her age, I remember thinking that he was a grown adult and that maybe my dad's age. And I was raised to always respect people older than me, so I stopped to smile at him. He smiled really sweetly at me, and when he was standing in front of me he said, "I really like your headband. You look like that girl from that movie." Now for reference, when I was in elementary school, I looked like the splitting image of Matilda, but with glasses. I always wore these 90s headbands and bangs. I secretly loved being compared to her because I really liked that movie. "Thanks, Matilda's one of my favorite movies," I said, and started to take a step again, but the guy shifted his weight, moving in my direction. "Oh, you have a Game Boy. What are you playing?" "Pokemon Silver," I said to him. His face lit up and he stepped closer. "Oh, how many gym badges do you have?" "I know a secret to how to get them all, and the hidden ones." For some reason I felt inferior all of a sudden, because I had just made it to the Kanto region, which is the second half of the game, and having all of the badges sounded really cool. And hidden ones? This guy sounded amazing. It makes me sick thinking how naive I was. But I didn't say anything and he said, "I could show you." I remember looking up at him, and he was staring hard into my eyes, the most intense stare I'd ever seen. "Okay," I said almost immediately. "Oh, but..." He looked down at his watch and sighed. "I can't right now, I have to go. But would you be able to come back here at 10:30? I can show you how to do it then. Can you sneak out?" That's when the alarm bells in my head started to ring. Come out after dark? Sneak out? I don't even know this guy's name. Stranger danger flashed behind my eyes, and he must have seen it because he said, "It's okay. I'm a friend. My friend will be there too. He's your age. I'm going to show him how to get the badges too. Maybe you two can battle." I remember saying okay to him, but my mind was racing. I was raised to be polite and didn't know how to say no and just walk the hell away. I did know that there was no way I was going to meet this guy after dark. He grinned and started saying bye, with his hands in his pockets. He backed away. "Okay, cool. We'll meet right here at 10:30. Bye." He turned around and walked across the street again and up the hill. I continued walking down the street until I turned onto mine, glancing back. The guy was watching me, and was back on the side of the street where we were on before. I walked quickly down my street, and when I was almost home, I looked back again. Sure enough, the guy was on my street, though he was in a neighbor's yard, silently standing behind a big lilac bush they had. I was terrified at this point. He was following me, trying to see which house is mine. What do I do? I kept walking until I just randomly booked it through a neighbor's yard, and I ran uphill through yards until I made it all the way across back to my friend's backyard. I wasn't going to try and go back in, but I was afraid to lead the creep to my friend. My parents weren't home, so what could we do? I didn't see him, but I did hear what sounded like someone running on grass. It may not have been him, but I ran downhill again, making a beeline to my house. I never looked back, and I ran inside and slammed the door. I don't remember what I told my parents, but I remember that I was scared and would get in trouble for talking to strangers, so I made up some lie about why I was running and went into my room. I didn't sleep that night. I was terrified he would show up at my window and break in. After that, I think my parents either knew something was wrong, or maybe there were other kids in the area being talked to by him, because I never walked to the friend's house alone after that. My mum either walked me, or my friend and I met at the middle point of our streets and walked each other back to the middle. I don't know if the guy was just trying to find a way to steal my Game Boy, or if he was planning on something else, but I'm glad we never met again. I attended a small liberal arts university with a student population of 3,600. However, during the summer, this population obviously goes down considerably, and the campus is mostly empty. You'll occasionally see someone who works there, or a student working there during the summer, but for the most part, it's pretty deserted. The summer between my junior and senior year, I worked on campus for the teams that host and run any conferences and events that take place. The school will rent out dorms and event space for groups, and students are in charge of cleaning, organizing, and managing these groups for their stay. A sort of hospitality team. As part of this, we would have someone at the front desk of the main university building in any dorms which were occupied from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. to field any questions or to otherwise help as needed. We each were required to work a certain number of shifts each week, and one of the shifts I was signed up for was 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. at the main university building. Absolutely nothing happened that night. I spent the evening catching up on The Daily Show. Rough job, I know. Nobody came by the center, nobody called, and we were trusted with the keys to the building, and whoever had the last shift of that evening had to lock up. As I stood outside locking the door, I heard someone ask behind me, "What time is it?" Having locked the door, I turned around, looked at my cell phone and replied, "It's 11:01. The guy was around my age. I knew he wasn't a student. It was a small enough school. where even if you don't know everyone, you generally recognized faces, and you definitely knew the handful of students working there over the summer. I started to walk across campus to the dorm, where they housed all the summer student workers, but I only got about 10 feet before I knew something was wrong. I stopped and turned around, and saw the guy following behind me, and he stopped as well. I figured he could just be heading the same way, so I continued walking, and we played this weird game of red light, green light about twice more for another 50 feet. It was at that moment I realized this was very, very wrong, and he was following me. "Can I help you?" I asked, praying perhaps he was just lost. "I'm locked out my place tonight," he replied. Not sure what to respond to that, I said, "Sorry to hear that. I hope you get back in." If this isn't a classic case of girls being conditioned to be polite and non-aggressive, even in a case where they shouldn't be expected to be, then I don't know what is. I had no idea what to do, so I carried on walking. My mind was racing. I turned to look at him a few times, and even directly stopped and looked at him once to let him know that I saw him. I was onto him. I felt so foolish I didn't know whether to scream or run or call someone on my phone. All of these, looking back, would have been much better options than just continue to walk with him following me. But it's like my brain wasn't working. I was panicking. I don't have a purse or anything, so I don't think he was trying to rob me. Thankfully, I passed by a dorm that had occupants in it, and my friend Mike, who was manning the front desk there the night, had decided to step out and smoke a cigarette. I had never been so glad to see someone smoking a cancer stick. "Mike, hi." I started towards him. He looked over, saw me, saw the guy following me, and somehow immediately knew something was wrong. I don't know whether it was panic on my face or the fact that the guy was acting so shady, but I'm glad he spotted it. I didn't even have to say anything, he just looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm done here, let's head back together." Of course, as soon as he saw Mike, my follower peeled off. I told Mike what happened, and as we walked back, he kept an eye out for him. But he was nowhere to be found. I thought it was the end of it. However, as we walked across the campus, we saw another summer worker, Julie, walking really fast looking behind her. Sure enough, there was Creepy McCreepy person. He had moved on quickly. "Julie," we yelled. As soon as he saw us, her face crumpled into the most relieved look I'd ever seen. The creeper ran away, and we all walked back to the dorm together. As soon as we were inside, we were completely freaking out and getting on our phone to call campus police. When we heard the door of the dorm violently jiggling, luckily you need an access card to get inside, but whoever was out there was trying awfully hard to get in. Campus police never found him. I thank God for Mike's nicotine addiction, and I don't take any more late night shifts. I continued to watch The Late Show though. I take the bus to my work, and the bus drops me off about 15 minutes walking distance. I play Pokemon Go, and intended to walk to some of the Pokestops that are on the way to my work. I got off the bus, and a couple of people get off as well, including this one older man who's about 65. I started walking on autopilot to the sidewalk next to the road, but then remembered the Pokestops and pivoted around and switched my direction by 90 degrees. This old man who had been walking behind me got in the same direction that I was in, and noticed that I started going the other way, and immediately changed his direction as well, and started following behind me. I turned into the small strip mall that hosted the Pokestops. I wanted to go and see the first one, so I walk up to it and stop and chill for a few minutes, collecting stuff from the stop and catching a couple of people that had popped up. He passed me, acting like he was going about his business, but then stops in front of a store 30 feet away from where I was standing and begins looking at the window. Keep in mind, all of these stores are closed at this point. It's 6 a.m. He has no phone in hand, so I know he's not playing the game either, and he keeps glancing back at me as I keep my eye on him. He eventually walks off and disappears around the corner, as the whole strip mall was curved so it was easy for him to vanish from my vision. I walked in the direction he went in to get to the next Pokestop, and I pass a wall on my right. As I pass the wall, he sees me and starts following me again. I'm pretty weirded out at this point. I don't stop at any more Pokestops and just keep walking to collect the items from them as I pass. All the while, he's following behind me, and I was worried that I was just being overly paranoid and decide to test to see whether he's following me or not. I stop at the last stop at the mall and dilly-dally on my phone for a few, and then he does the same thing where he waits for me and starts following me again as I pass. I give him a dirty look when I look behind me, and then speed walk to an office complex that was across the street from my job, as I didn't want him to know where I worked. I sat down at these secluded benches they have in front of them, where a Pokestop was at. I never saw him again after that, but when I get off the bus tomorrow, I'm definitely going to be filming if he does it again. What should I do if he repeats this? All I know is that I don't want to meet me again. I was a 26-year-old small female and lived in Texas the time when this happened, and still lived with my parents, but was working to try and afford an apartment. Almost every day I start the day by taking my Bichon Frise dog, Molly, for a walk. She was an absolute love bug and wouldn't hurt a fly. My dad had adopted her for my 20th birthday. I started walking. 2 blocks in, there was a house with 3 men on the porch smoking and talking to each other. I see them almost every day when I walk. 2 of them never paid any mind when I was walking past the house, except for one of them who I had never seen before. He was a bit big compared to the other 2, and looked to be in his 20s and was bald. I thought he was one of their friends. When I saw that he was staring in my direction, I quickly faced forwards. Growing up, I was a very antisocial person, so I wasn't the type to greet anyone who I walked past. But these guys didn't seem like the kind of people to say it to. As I kept on walking, I heard the bald man yell out, "Hey gorgeous, nice puppy you got there. Come over here, let me pet him." I walked faster, but turned around to see him walking down the porch and down the sidewalk. "Why you walking so fast?" he called again. I heard laughter from the other 2 men. At this moment I began jogging with Molly. Halfway down the block I turned my head to see him walking back to the house, but that didn't stop me from jogging back to mine. When I got home, I had the chance to tell my parents, but stupidly didn't, thinking that it wasn't serious. The next morning I had a bad feeling, so didn't go for the walk. But the day after I did. Feeling a bit more scared, I secretly took my mum's pepper spray just in case. I began the walk. Being the dumbass I was, I walked past the same house, expecting not to see the man, but of all my luck the man was there. He was sitting on a rocking chair on the porch, looking as if he were waiting for someone. When he saw me, he shot up as if his chair were on fire. My eyes widened as he started following me. "Stop walking away, I just want to talk." In fear, I picked up Molly and bolted down the sidewalk, getting away from the man again. But to my horror, I looked to see that he was chasing after me, and I started to freak out. He was fast, too fast. The next thing I know, he's pushing me onto the ground, making me fall on my face onto the hard concrete, and dropping Molly, who began whimpering and barking, knowing that something was terribly wrong. I began screaming for help. He rolled me over, covered my mouth, blocking my screams, clawing at his hands and struggling to get him off me, when I realized I had the pepper spray in my pocket. So I took the can out and sprayed him in his eyes. He screamed out in pain and rolled off me. I quickly got up and picked up Molly and sprinted home, leaving the guy rolling on the ground in pain. I got home and of course frantically explained the situation to my parents. My dad, who is a retired Marine, wanted to go up to the house to confront the man, but my mum told me to go to the police station and file a report. I spoke to an officer and told him what happened. I showed him the bloody nose and cut on my forehead caused by falling face first. He said he would go over to the house and bring the man to the police station. I never got an update on that. A few months later, I avoided the block where the incident happened and wasn't bothered by anyone. The job I worked at was at a 7-Eleven open 24 hours. My friend who also worked there asked me to work the night shift because she needed to take care of her sick brother. I accepted and did what I had to do. After the night shift, I walked home. When I turned the corner, I noticed a pickup truck driving slowly and way too close to the sidewalk. I never paid any mind to it until it kept following me. Speeding up my pace, I walked through an empty alley hoping to lose the car, and finally it wasn't there. As I was walking up to my house, I looked behind me one more time to see the same pickup truck driving past. I got the chance to see two men in the truck, panicking and opening the door and slamming it shut. I told my dad what happened and he told my mum. She started going off on me about how if it was the same man, and he knows where I live now. I will admit I felt stupid for going straight home when I should have been looking out to see if the truck was following me. For 2 days, my dad was on the lookout in front of the house in case someone tried something, and nothing really happened until the next night. This night traumatized me, and guilt still consumes me to this day. It was about 2 a.m. when Molly, who was in bed with me, started barking at something at the window behind my bed. Being too tired, lazy and grumpy, I shrugged it off and tried going back to sleep. It wasn't until I woke to hear Molly yelping in pain. I opened my eyes and shot up in a panic and saw my dog's lifeless body in the floor, covered in blood, with a dark figure standing over her. My heart stopped and tears filled in my eyes. I was ready to get off the bed and run, but then a heavy body was thrown on top of me. It was the same man, but he covered my mouth and I let out a scream, hoping my parents would hear. "Do you think you could pepper spray me and get away with it? I think not." My vision blurred after the man punched my eye. "Stop fighting. This'll be quick." I kept on kicking and hitting the man, but he didn't flinch. I heard him trying to get his belt off. Pure terror swept over my body. Then all of a sudden, I heard my door swing open with my dad and his gun in hand with Mum behind. As soon as he saw the man, he shot him twice in the shoulder and once in his lower back. The man screamed in agony and I pushed him off me. My dad then ran up to the man, grabbed him by the collar and started beating the crap out of him, showing no mercy. My mum ran up to me, hugging me, frantically asking if he hurt me. Ignoring what she was saying, I just ran up to Molly, who was still whimpering in pain, and I held her until she passed. My dad screamed at my mum to call the police and stopped beating the unconscious man, not caring that he had bullets in him. When he saw that he was a sliver away from death, he stayed with me and comforted me until about 5 minutes later when sirens were heard in the distance. My dad dragged the almost perished man outside to the police while paramedics came up to my room to see if I was okay. Turns out that not only the man was at the house, but his 2 other friends who were waiting 2 houses away in a van had a rope and a gag and a pack of tweezers, for reasons I never want to know. When the man recovered from the beatdown my dad gave him, police took him into custody. He said the plan was to break in, take me, and go to the same house and do horrific things with me until they were done. The reason why the guy tried to go right into my bedroom was because he wanted me first. He stabbed my dog, my best friend. Not only that, but he tried to assault me in the worst way possible. The fact of that makes me want to throw up all over my screen. Every day I always thought what I could have done to avoid this whole thing from happening. Most of you think she was just a dog, but to me she wasn't. I never stopped thanking my parents for saving my life, and for the man, He got life in prison. I hope he rots for the rest of his life. His friends were also caught along with him and were sentenced to 16 years for multiple charges. I still live with my parents, not because of lack of money for an apartment, because of how paranoid and scared I became of being alone. As I'm writing this, I feel disgusted and guilty. I was playing Pokemon Go last night during an event, and like an idiot, I walked into a park by myself in the dark. There were a few late-night dog walkers and people around there when I arrived, so I thought it was fine. But by the time I got all the Pokemon in the area, everyone that was around there had left, and I was all alone in the dark. So it was about then when I was like, okay, something's gonna happen to me out here. It's time to leave. And boy am I glad I did. As I get about halfway down the driveway, a car passed at full speed, turns around at the dead end of the park, and then drives back past me. I was a little spooked because I was very aware of how easy a victim I am right now, but maybe they were just lost. As I continue walking and catching things, while I walk, the car drives past me 3 more times. There's nothing down this road except the car park and myself. So now I'm thoroughly spooked. The 4th and 5th time they drive past, they slow down right next to me and then zoom off again around a corner. In a moment of sheer panic, I ran to a nearby parked car, dove underneath it and lay still. Lo and behold, the car comes back around and slows down in the spot where I was before. A car door opens, and a guy gets out, walks around for a bit and then swears, gets back into his car, and then drives away faster than before. I laid under that car for ages before I ran home via a well-lit road. Although I've definitely learnt not to wander around by myself at night anymore, I have no idea who the creepy guy was in the car, and I'd rather never find out. This past year was my senior year of college, and I was thrilled to be living with an alumni of my sorority who I was very close with, Abbey. We weren't actually supposed to be living in the apartment we ended up in. We were originally going to be living in a townhouse with 2 other girls, but they started so much drama a month before we were supposed to move in that we had to contact our landlord to find a different place with their moving company to live. Thankfully, we found a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom basement apartment in a quiet area off campus. The first month was fine and without incident, but as the days went by, some strange things began to happen in the apartment. One morning, Abbey woke up to a kitchen cabinet open. She wasn't that concerned about it and figured that I had just forgotten to shut it the night before. The next morning, a different cabinet was open, and once again she shrugged it off. However, I went home one weekend and she woke up to find every cabinet in the kitchen wide open and the sink running. Needless to say, Abbey was scared and spent the night at her boyfriend's. 2 weeks later, we were watching TV and heard the bathroom door close. I tried to calm Abbey down by saying that the fan we kept in the bathroom blew it closed. However, when we went to bed, we thought we could hear someone walking around in our living room. There's no way someone broke into our apartment and hid the whole day only to come out at night and mess with us. I was home the whole day, and Abbey was home from 11 in the morning. That incident took place shortly before Christmas break, and all was calm in the apartment until February. Abbey had gone home for the weekend, and I was home alone, relaxing on the couch and doing homework. It was pretty late at night, so I turned on the TV for background noise and curled up on the couch to sleep. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning to see Abbey walking through the front door smiling but not saying anything. I blinked, still groggy from sleep, and asked if she was okay. She just looked at me and proceeded to take off her shoes and walk into the kitchen. Something about her didn't seem right. Like this girl looked like Abbey and walked like Abbey, but it wasn't her. I asked her again if she was okay, because it was so early in the morning for her to be coming home. Abbey looked at me and smiled and began washing something in the sink. Something inside me felt a profound sense of dread, like I was in danger and needed to get away. As quickly as possible, I went to my room and locked my door. My roommate followed me, because I heard someone tapping their fingers against the door. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, it wouldn't stop. I didn't say another word, because it felt like if I did acknowledge her, it gave her more strength. I know that doesn't make much sense, but that was my instinct. I curled up beneath my blankets and stared at my bedroom door, almost waiting for her to kick it in. My eyes felt heavy, and the tapping was almost like a metronome enticing me to sleep. As I drifted back to sleep, the taps seemed to slow down to a trickle. The morning after, I was exhausted. It felt like I had taken 20 Advil PM to help me sleep. But I remember everything that had happened. Cautiously, I left my room and saw Abbey's bed had not been disturbed or slept in. I went to the living room and her shoes and purse weren't there. A cold feeling crept into my spine as I sent her a text asking if she'd come home that night. She said no, she hadn't and wouldn't be coming home for another 2 days. But then I checked the sink, and the bowl Abbey had been washing had been cleaned and put away. I firmly believe I was not dreaming or hallucinating, and I know this wasn't some elaborate prank by Abbey, because she could never do anything like that. I firmly believe something took her shape that night, and its intentions weren't good. There were a few other experiences in their apartment, but nothing so drastic as what I went through that night. This happened a week ago. I was sitting in the living room, crocheting. I was out there with my mother, watching cooking shows, when she left for a bit. I was sitting quietly, just focusing on my craft when I heard something strange. Loud 8-bit music. I thought for a second it was my cell phone, but when I checked, nothing. I went around the room, even listened closely to my laptop that I had the crocheting pattern on, just in case it was a pop-up ad. Nothing. I eventually made it to my room, and the music is getting louder. I go over to this container that I had a bunch of miniature things in. Inside I find my old Game Boy Pocket Edition, one of those really tiny ones with preloaded games, and you couldn't change the cartridge. It had an alarm going off. I never set an alarm, and I hadn't turned this device on since I was 10. I got it in 2006. At the time, the calendar was chronologically correct, reading off 2006 when I got it. However, instead of reading 2019, it now read February 7th, 1998. I was born on February 7th, 1996. The date of this strange alarm was my 2nd birthday. It was one of the strangest things I have ever experienced in recent months. How peculiar. My stepfather is a truck driver. Anyone who's familiar with the 401 highway in Ontario knows how crap it can be in winter. He was heading to Ottawa after a pickup in Toronto, and just before Kingston, another truck had jackknifed about 10 minutes past Kingston. When the truck jackknifed, it slid into the barrier and rolled. The traffic was moving, but pretty heavy. The cars behind the truck didn't have time to stop, and 14 or 15 vans and pickups ran into the initial crash at speed. My stepfather was a few vehicles behind, but saw the initial crash and hit his air brakes for all he was worth. Luckily, he had the length to get it to stop, and his load was heavy, but not enough force in order to keep the truck rolling. About 10 to 15 minutes go by. First responders are on the scene inspecting the crash and working out how to start getting to the victims still trapped. My stepfather has always stressed one specific detail about vehicle safety in the event of a situation such as this. Stay in the car unless there is immediate danger in there with you, or you can see someone in urgent need. Wait for the first responder to come to you unless you're injured and have a clear path away from the road. So he's idling his truck about 10 meters back from the crash itself, and he sees a woman whose car is about midway in the pileup slowly open the door and kind of stagger out her mangled car. She looks disoriented and is clearly moving like she's confused and doesn't know what's happening. He has an "oh crap" moment and opens the door about to run and get her. She's staggering towards the median, not the shoulder, and he's worried about how she's going to wander into the oncoming other side of the highway. As she's stepping out onto the running boards, he hears an air horn pulled repeatedly. He jumps back in and pulls his door closed behind him, as another transport comes straight onto the wreck. The guy hit more than black ice, and the weight of his load and momentum carried the truck forward toward the median. The woman had made it to a point where she was between the truck and the median. My stepfather watched a woman, who he'd been about to run out to and pull from the road, get cut in half. 7 years ago, I was a preteen, a 12-year-old girl, and was really into the world of Warcraft, like really into it. I would wake up at 4 a.m. and play until I had school, and then play until I had to sleep. During summer break, I would play all day, every day. So when I was 13, I joined a guild that seemed to have a lot of chill people, just into achievement hunting, pug runs, and would help with quests for the lower levels. There was this one man called Bear, and he would start messaging me all the time, getting me to go on vent all the time. Of course, I was a naive 13-year-old girl and thought this was okay and kind of exciting. So we would talk a lot, and eventually I added him to a secondary Facebook account I made specifically for him, which didn't have my address or anything. There were a few pictures of me, and he would comment on them and call me beautiful and such. After creeping through his profile, I realized he looked a lot older than me, and having never asked him his age before, I finally and nonchalantly bring it up. Bear, with zero shame, admits he's double my age at 26. I don't really know what to do, so I just act like it's all fine, and he starts getting creepy on me right after I asked his age. Every time he asked me to go on vent, he began dirty talking me, and I don't mean lovely seduction stuff, I mean like, have you ever had someone lick you all the way up your spine? I'd love to be your first, and creepy stuff like that. I never said anything more than, "Oh, back," and he always took that as I was shy and uneducated, and I let him believe that. This went on for several months, and he would just send half-naked pictures to my Facebook account, and got creepier by the day. I left the guild and blocked him on everything, when he said he had a surprise for me. And upon asking what it was, figuring it would be a cool mount or companion, he said he was saving up money and gonna fly to me. He knew which province I lived in Canada, and he was in the States. Without me telling him, and he was going to come take me away and make me feel things I'd never felt before. I haven't heard from him since, deleted my Facebook account and switched servers. But to this day, I'm always keeping my eye out for that creep, since I don't know if he still has it in his head to try and steal me away. Considering he narrowed down my whereabouts, he could probably do much more. I hope to never meet him. This happened during my final year in college. I took a fun class called Theatre in LA, which is basically a class where you watch different plays once a week all over LA. Since the theatres are all over the place and not everyone had a car, the professor organized a carpool system you could volunteer into. I know what it's like to be carless in LA, so I volunteered to drive someone around, and I got partnered with Bob. It started out okay. He really made himself comfortable in my car, changing the music non-stop and going through my glove compartment, snacks and water, without asking me. But whatever. I've met a lot of people with boundary issues before. Things started picking up when we found out we had the same taste in music. We got talking. I mentioned I had a fake ID, and he mentioned he smoked up. I mentioned I wanted to try weed, but I haven't had the opportunity to, as I'm non-American and only moved to the US for college. Too nerdy to get invited to fun stuff, and so far so good. Then my mum called. I had to answer, since my mum is the type who would keep calling until you'd answer. My car has one of those Bluetooth speakers, so he could hear the entire conversation. But my mum and I were speaking in Indonesian, so I didn't care. At random parts of the conversation he'd start giggling, and it was making me really self-conscious. Did he think I sounded funny? After I hung up, I asked, "What's so funny?" "Heh, nothing." Okay, so now we're driving in an awkward silence. Then he started making this weird hee-hee noise. It was a cross between a bray and a wheeze and a giggle. I asked him if he was okay, if he was having an asthma attack or something. He said it was fine, and at random parts of the drive he'd laugh on his own and make that weird noise. Things are getting weird now. We finally arrived at the theatre, and I quickly talked to the other people to get away from him. Then realized loudly he yelled, "Hey, take your fake ID out and buy me booze." Why are you yelling that out loud? Come on, buy booze, buy booze. This girl quickly rescued me by dragging me to the bathroom with her. Apparently he was harassing her earlier for cocaine. She doesn't do coke or even said anything about it. He met her for the first time ever, and the first thing he said was, "Hey, do you have coke?" Anyway, the play was over close to midnight, and it was time to go home. Bob went, "Hey, do you want to find weed? Drive us downtown and let's look for some." No, I'm not driving downtown in the middle of the night. I told him no, and he kept on whining and chanting. This was before medical marijuana was legalized, so I kept telling him to shut up. During the car ride back, he kept alternating between whining and chanting, "Let's get weed," and "I want to stop at a food joint," and laughing randomly on his own. Thanks to the jam trying to get out of the movie theater, it was past midnight, so I was exhausted. I was in no mood to eat, even if he were normal, and I kept telling him that I had plenty of snacks in the car and he could help himself to, which he did, but he wouldn't stop whining. I just ended up turning it all out, but he never stopped. I was so relieved when I dropped him off. The next day was Saturday, and I was woken up by a phone call. It was Bob, since he had my number as we were carpool buddies. "Hello?" I had no idea why he was shouting. There was no noise in the background. "Buy me booze. You have fake ID. You need to buy me booze." What the hell? He woke me up for that? I was half asleep, told him very bluntly to piss off. After that, I constantly got calls from Bob at random times, including the middle of the night. Most of them would just be asking for a free ride or booze or whatever. He wouldn't stop laughing. He wouldn't say anything, he'd just laugh. He had various different laughs too. The evil scientist, the cartoon villain, the Mickey Mouse on helium laugh. And I know this sounds comical, but I was petrified. The weirdest call I got from him was at 2 a.m. He went, "Hey, I found a storage container on campus. I'm in it now. Join me." He tried asking me where I was on campus so we could hang out, but obviously I didn't tell him. He actually replied with, "I'll just follow you back next time." Which doesn't sound that creepy, but with Bob saying it, I thought he'd be wearing a shawl made of entrails soon enough. Obviously I had to end this arrangement, but I was scared of getting on his bad side since he was giving me mentally unstable vibes. I lied and told him that my very conservative Asian parents were worried about me driving alone at night with a strange man, so they insisted on me carpooling with a family friend instead. Out of desperation, I went to the only person in class I sort of knew and also had a car, Steve, and I explained the situation. Steve is someone I've met once at a party, but luckily he was awesome, and he agreed to back up my story and drive me to the theatre for the rest of the semester. Luckily for me, Steve happened to be Asian too, so the story seemed believable, because yes, Bob questioned me about it. Steve also happened to be really buff and made sure he always placed himself in between Bob and me, so Bob kind of left me alone after that. I blocked Bob's number, told him I changed it, and conveniently kept forgetting to give it to him. Bob apparently had a hard time finding another carpool buddy. Everyone found him creepy, and no one lasted more than one ride with him. and eventually stopped coming to the class. I think the professor failed him too. I do feel bad because I think the guy may have some untreated mental issues or a drug problem, but that dude really scared me. I was in our local park playing Harry Potter Wizards Unite. It's a good place because there are 4 stops that give you energy, so I just go back and forth while playing. It is insanely hot outside, so there is just me, some people with their kids on the playground, which is a bit off behind the trees so they can't see or hear me, and some guy wandering around like I do but without a phone. I go around playing my game and not thinking anything of it. He was probably just waiting for someone. He, like me, goes from shadow to shadow because the sun is just too hot. I sit on a bench for a while, and while playing I see him behind some of the houses in the park. It's an old cultural park with an old windmill and such, and these houses host private events sometimes. There is a tight space between these with bushes and train tracks behind and beneath. The most exciting thing back there is heart-shaped confetti and garbage. I go here every day, I know that. The guy gets closer and sits beneath a tree just beside me. He sits there for a while and then says something. I push my earphones aside and ask him what he said. He was just trying to make small talk and didn't speak much of my language as we have tons of immigrants and he was very obviously one of them. It was clear he didn't understand what I said. I just play on and sit quietly for a while. I get up, go 20 meters forward to reach a stop. When I turn around to go back, he's right behind me. He then follows me back to the houses and asks my name and if I live alone and if I'm married. I do, but of course I tell him I live with my boyfriend. He then points to the back of the houses and wants to show me something. I tell him no, and he grabs my wrist real hard and begins to pull. I resist, and he thankfully let go. I just keep on babbling that there's nothing too interesting there. There's just tracks and bushes. I find this all really creepy, and I'm being too polite. I start walking out of the park, and he followed me. He walked beside me like we were friends. In the beginning, I think it's just a cultural thing, but we are extremely rigid and hate talking to strangers. But they often seem to like it and can be very friendly. I can be polite and sociable if I have to, but this is pushing my buttons and is way too creepy. I live right near the park and he's still here, right beside me, not saying much, but obviously going with me. I decide to go to my boyfriend's house, and that were the longest 10 minutes of my life. He occasionally asks more questions. Do I live in a house? Stuff like that. And I keep on playing my game, pretending to be somewhat in my own world. When we're almost at the neighborhood my boyfriend has his house in, I cross the road to get there. He misses it and keeps going forward. And when he sees that, I just wave, bye. I walk a bit further, but then he crosses the road through traffic. I thought I'd lost him. He goes in front of me and turns right and walks away, like the goodbye stuck. I try to walk calmly round the houses where my boyfriend lives, but I just want to run, and I unlock the door and rush in. My boyfriend comes downstairs and wonders what I'm doing there so early, so I just throw myself in his arms. I had him walk me home and then call the cops. I didn't think there was much they could do. I have no idea who this person is or what his name was or what he wanted, but at least it's on paper now in case anything else happens. I remember when I spoke to the cops, I said that he was not already in the park when I got there, and that he walked past me when I arrived because I stopped to get the stops in the game. That meant he came from the same street I did, which also leads to my real house, which is, as I said, super close. I'm just hoping he didn't see me exit. I know nothing happened, but it was really creepy. I don't want to stop going to my local park, but he's really made me feel uncomfortable. I think I'll stay inside today. I was walking to the store at about 10 p.m. I left my house to walk onto the empty sidewalk, and I hardly saw any cars in the street. As I was walking up ahead, I saw a car with headlights on, but I didn't see anyone in or around it. The door to the driver and passenger seats were open. I noped out and decided I wanted to take the shortcut instead, which was to hop over this alley wall instead to get there faster. I didn't want to walk on the same street as the ghost car, so I jumped over the wall via these pile of bricks, and I find myself at the back of this building leading to the parking lot. I walk over to the side of the building to head over to the store where I'm planning to buy some snacks. So as I'm walking, I turn on Pokemon Go, because I realized there were nearby stops, so I pulled my phone out, catch a few Pokemon, get a few eggs and the like. Afterwards, I put my phone away, and as I'm getting close to the store, this car comes off the road, pulling into the parking lot and drives right by me. The driver looks at me, and I look at him. He looks like an older guy with grey hair, mid-50s. You want to get some action? If I didn't specify already, I'm a guy. I got scared as hell. It was so random and such a weird question. I replied with a firm, no. Right after I said that, he suddenly drives off the street away from me, all the way down the freeway. I then run back to my house from a different route to be safe. That was one of the weirdest, strangest, and creepiest encounters I've had to date. Rewind this time to the year 2002. I was in a residential nationwide high school, which is in Washington, D.C. And everyone knows that D.C., or any other major city, can be dangerous. I was invited to visit one of my friends' home for spring break. I met with some local students, and they were all cute. They invited me on a night out with them, and one of the boys borrowed his mum's van, wanting to go cruising around Phoenix to show me the sights. I was the only girl in the group of boys. There were 9 of us hunkered down in an old Dodge white van. One of the guys had a brilliant idea of doing drive-by egg throws, so they bought eggs and kept the van door open as they tossed eggs at pedestrians. This wasn't what got us into trouble. After all of our dozen eggs were tossed, we shut the van door and were getting ready to go home. This is when it hit the fan. I was sitting in the back of the van. We were at a red light. Then a silver Honda Accord pulled alongside us, and I saw 2 men in the car. They kept looking at us. Immediately, one of them rolled down the window and actually showed us his firearm, and was saying something that I couldn't understand. The light turned green. The boy driving his mother's white Dodge van tried unsuccessfully to dart ahead or even dodge, and that wasn't happening with 9 school students in a van. We were chased by the silver Honda Accord. We tried slowing down and speeding up, making quick turns, but to no luck. Their Honda Accord was able to keep up easily, and it wasn't helping that the streets were empty. We accidentally ended up cornering ourselves in when we pulled into a water reservoir entrance that had a dead end. The 2 guys came out their Honda, their headlights shining in our eyes, and they had weapons. They each had 2, and were using bandanas on their shaved heads. They were surprised how many people came out the van, and even more surprised that we were all deaf and were signing. They realized that we weren't throwing up gang signs at them. Then they said, "My bad," and just left. For once, being deaf saved my life. So dudes in bandanas and Honda Accords that are in Phoenix, Arizona, let's not ever meet. Also, do not throw eggs at people. We were in high school and stupid.